Cyberpunk, Shiny and Chrome. By Rastislav. 31. Chapter 31. Afterlife. Michael Magos Sobronov. Ceiling seems to be in order. I noted in what I believe to be a professional tone. The subdermals should still work as advertised, though some of the cracked spots will have slightly reduced resistance. How reduced are we talking here? Dorio asked with a small frown. Barely noticeable. I shrugged and stepped away from her, but that kind of wear and tear is to be expected and inevitably stacks up. I recommend replacing your armor within 2 years at the longest. She considered it briefly and nodded. I'll look into it. Content with her answer, I looked at the rest of the group, having returned to the safe house after a suspiciously peaceful morning to check on them all. Maine was still stuck with his perpetual not-quite glare whenever he looked at me. He said absolutely nothing, but his desire to just get everything over with was palpable. His partner, whom I had just checked on, was far more of a tolerable patient, and seemed to accept my words with the weight they were owed. Pilar looked dead inside, a fact no doubt attributed to the smug smirk of his sister, who was practically vibrating in place while waiting for me to finish up. And then there was her, the complete and utter idiot that had netted me a fat payday and nearly cost me a dear friend. She had awoken just an hour before I returned and seemed both horrified at what she nearly did to her team, but hid a deep satisfaction at her accomplishment against Biotechnica. Naturally, all of that fell apart whenever I arrived. Sasha Yakovleva, when in my presence, was skittish in the extreme, looking at me with an awed kind of terror I'd only really ever seen shared by Jugo's dweller asterisk, after I showed him just how utterly outclassed he was. She overcame that emotion halfway through my checkup and tried pestering me with questions that quickly revealed she had pieced together my identity as the famed netrunner, Magos. Not that I made it difficult in the first place, but I did not feel like indulging her in any way, and so treated her with cold detachment the entire time. A treatment that made her wilt for a while before her lacking mind no doubt came up with some immense bullshit that made her eyes light up with misguided determination. I honestly did not want to comprehend that level of delusion, and so I didn't. Satisfied with my work, I took Maine's silent request and promptly left the building, followed by an excitable Rebecca, who did her best not to wince whenever she stepped on her wounded leg. Rolling my eyes, I grabbed her by the back of her jacket, ignored the startled "eep," and placed her on my shoulder. "Shoulder gremlin get?" I deadpanned. She choked on air briefly and then burst into full-blown laughter before playfully smacking my head. Gonk. How harsh. I chuckled as well, walking over to my home away from home, the van, opening the side door and gently sitting her down on the edge while I remained standing. For a moment, neither of us knew exactly where to begin, so I decided to just barrel through the awkwardness. "How are you feeling?" I asked. I hoped we could catch up inside, but, well... My hand flopped as if to say, "What can you do?" Rebecca groaned. "Maine is a fucking gonk sometimes, but he is good people, I swear." "Being good doesn't stop you from being a moron." I shrugged, but I frankly don't give a fuck anymore. What is done is done. "How are you holding up?" She frowned for a moment and then made a detached noise. Everything finally hit me in the morning when the drugs wore off and I may have had a bit of a panic attack. She looked away as if ashamed. But now I am just happy we didn't flatline. "Panic is a perfectly normal response to that kind of stress," I immediately said. She looked back at me with a bemused glint in her eyes. "You are just too precious, you know that." And seeing my own incredulous look, she chuckled. "Don't worry, I am not a gonk. I am perfectly fine now." Something told me that was a lie, and that same something told me pressing the issue was foolish. "Fine." I sighed and promptly decided to change the topic. "You seen the news yet?" Her eyes lit up. "Oh yeah, we are famous now." "Try too famous," I griped. "Got a call from the afterlife last night." "No shit?" She goggled. "Seriously?" "Yup." I smacked my lips, holding back a sigh, straight from the old queen herself. Somehow, Rebecca's eyes managed to light up even more. "So, I forced myself not to shift on my feet. "Wanna come with?" She looked just about ready to jump me, then and there, but managed to stop herself in the last moment, looking hesitantly in the direction of the safe house. Shouldn't I stay hidden with the team? Showing my face this soon will probably fuck us over. It looked like each syllable pained her to say, and it only made me appreciate her more for doing it anyway. Don't worry about it, I smirked. A quick wardrobe change, a small reprogram of your optics, and net coverage from me, and no one will even notice you. You sure? She asked hopefully. Without a doubt. I nodded. Her previous excitement returned, and her grin with it. Then fuck the hell yes. This time she did try to jump me. Except she tried doing so with her injured limb. Cheeky little shit laughed the entire time as I fixed the stitches. We didn't immediately make a beeline for the afterlife, of course. I was invited at the evening, and going too early would look pretty pathetic to the usual gonks that frequented the place. And as much as I hated it, I now had an image to maintain. If only to secure the best business possible came my way. Thankfully, I wasn't given much time to gripe about my woes, as Rebecca practically dragged me through half of Little China with all the appreciation for life someone who had it flash before their eyes could have. Our first stop was a clothing store, where she changed her usual outfit for a deep green hoodie that was a few sizes too big for her and a pair of jeans. And with my quick modification of her eyes software, replacing her usual striking colors to a mundane brown, she really did end up looking like a whole different person, which gave us enough confidence to sit ourselves in one of the more well-off restaurants of the district. Not one of those scams made to milk as much money as they could from the usual corpo with their cultured meals, but a neat place on a relatively peaceful street that had actual real food on their menus. They were a bit suspicious of me, being a literal death machine and all, but as soon as I greeted them with the proper politeness and showed myself to be a paying customer, all of that disappeared. Naturally, I made sure to take a picture of Rebecca's face when I made our order of real foodstuffs, holding absolutely nothing back. Some of the best eddies I ever spent. That the money came from her irritating boss only satisfied my inner pettiness. We chatted as we ate about random things that were of no real consequence whatsoever and were nonetheless enjoyable due to the company, but inevitably the topic returned to the one we discussed last night. Thankfully, I had the foresight to sit us down in a more secluded corner of the restaurant, and with only slight hesitation I resumed my tale. Holy shit, she muttered as I finished telling her about the rescue of my mother. Wait, she is fine now, right? Her eyes told me she expected my answer to be negative, and at the same time that she was hopeful she was wrong. I was more than happy to reward that hope. As fine as can be, she is coherent and getting better by the day. I let out a long exhale, leaning back into my seat. I'm just happy she is alive after going through all that. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly before she smiled. Well, I am happy for you. And I am happy to hear it. I smiled back, ignoring the fuzzies trying to play with my internals. She nodded a few times, and then her eyes narrowed. Wait, you weren't shitting me when you said that night at Lizzie's was after your first gig. Why would I? I smirked. She muttered something along the lines of fucking hardcore. Why thank you, I drawled. She couldn't help but snort gonk. The rest of the midday we spent just wandering the district, visiting shops, chatting, shooting at a range, simply relaxing with each other. Not since I was half-conscious as a child did a day pass this quickly. As if in a blink, the sun disappeared and the agreed-upon time arrived, and I was silently driving my war machine to the famed gathering spot of Night City's mercenaries, the creatively named repurposed morgue known as the Afterlife, which just happened to be in Little China. Oh, how I loved convenience. We parked a good distance away from the locale itself and took our time walking over to the increasingly crowded and increasingly loud space surrounding it. Rebecca was still buzzing in place with all her excitement, but thankfully wasn't trying to skip along the way like I was afraid she would. I almost felt guilty for not trying to get Jackie to come as well, but knowing his prideful ass, if he didn't get a direct invite himself, he'd call it something stupid like a handout and bitch and moan at me for minutes like a gonk. He'd get there on his own efforts soon enough anyways. The crowd around the bar was thankfully not suffocating, and all it took to assure it did not become such was my bulk looming over anyone stupid enough to try and interrupt. The entrance was surprisingly mundane for all the place's rep, and only the long line of hopefuls trying to get in, only to be turned away by the animal bouncer without a single care for what they had to say. Thankfully, I wasn't forced to wait in said line and merely passed them by, drawing angry looks and curses, but no actual Darwin Award attempts, at least not today. The bouncer didn't so much as twitch at my appearance, nor at my cutting the line, instead simply raising an arm to stop me. Names? Magos. I answered simply and pointed a thumb at Rebecca. This is my +1. He didn't react visibly, but I detected his agent buzzing for a moment. A few seconds later, he offered a slow nod. You are on the list, and stepped out of the way. An action that immediately spread murmurs among the crowd and even some exclamations as they finally recognized who I was. Even without me being a 7-foot-tall pure cyborg, my get-up was pretty distinct, and the damn sword I liked too much to leave behind was even more so. Mr. Bronson. I offered a polite nod back, completely ignored the rowdy onlookers, and we stepped into the afterlife. The place was underwhelmingly small from the inside. All the harping on the net made it seem like it was supposed to be this mythical realm where the heroes gathered to conduct business and celebrate their successes. But all I saw was just a place. It was just as loud as other nightclubs, just as bright in neon lights and posters that had long since lost both relevance and much of their ink. It played the same music you'd hear on the radio, and it even had the fucking vending machines. Even the furniture was just as worn at places, but I suspected that was meant to add to the charm, which to be entirely fair it did. The only real difference from other places was that a good chunk of the clients were among those mercenaries intelligent enough to wear some kind of protective clothing, or sported advanced cyberware, and thus intelligent enough to ensure a chance at survival. How mildly disappointing. Rebecca and I walked over to the bar proper. Even if Rogue had invited me, there was an unspoken, but certainly written as far as the net went, rule that you didn't approach her unless her guard called you over. Sensible. She was a busy woman. I remained standing while Rebecca hopped onto a bar stool and the bartender gave us a quick, "Be there in a sec," as she zoomed past us, carrying a tray of drinks. Man, Rebecca exhaled, I can't believe we are actually here. Meh. I couldn't help the anticipatory snort that left me. The fuck you mean, May? Her head moved so quickly she almost snapped something. It is the afterlife. Most people die trying to get here, and all you have to say is meh. Meh, I repeated smugly, saying nothing else. Ugh. She groaned and pointedly turned to the bartender. Gimme a silver hand. I need to unhear this shit. The woman who had approached us in the meantime laughed, one silver hand coming up. As she fiddled with the cocktail, she gave me a look. You drink? A fair question for a cyborg, I hummed to myself. A beer, whatever you think is interesting. She placed the cup of cocktail in front of the groaning Rebecca and grabbed a bottle of black liquid. I think you'll like this one. I gave the root beer a quick look and shrugged. What makes you so sure? I asked even as I opened it and took a sip. It was an odd mix of spicy, bitter, and sweet. I never guessed I would end up working together, but to my surprise I found I quite liked the combination, even if I had to stop my eye from twitching as my internal scanners went through the components. The woman smirked victoriously. Told ya? Yeah, I rolled my eyes. I bow to your greater wisdom, Ms. Russell. Didn't know I was so famous. She chuckled and then gave me a curious once-over, not like you, Margot's. She added a teasing lilt to the tag, planning on earning yourself a place on the menu. Only idiots plan on dying, I said, feeling slightly annoyed that it was the first assumption, but also knowing my statement was the truth. If you planned on having a drink in the afterlife, you were subconsciously accepting that dying was an option, and I would outlive all of these idiots. If you say so. She shrugged easily. You aren't the first one. Truly, I drawled, to think this city actually has intelligent people still living in it. She shook her head, still smiling. Well, I can't force you, but you could give me a mix just in case. You never know what might happen. Rebecca immediately gave me an expectant look. And I will admit, for all my harping, I caved almost immediately. Fiend. I groaned, and then felt that little spiteful devil on my shoulder whisper something, and promptly began listing a mix for high-efficiency coolant fluid, one that was a proprietary patent of Arasaka I may or may not have, acquired from one of my netrunner friends. Looking to die a cool death was something I would never accept, but spiting those most probable to end up killing me if it did happen, now that was something I could get behind. Claire Russell's eyebrows kept rising as I listed the ingredients, while Rebecca was trying and failing not to laugh her ass off, and by the time I was done, we had drawn quite a few eyes. The poor bartender exhaled as she finished the extensive list and pouted at me. You know, if you wanted me to fuck off, you could have just said so. All I could do at that was tap my beer bottle while radiating smugness. But where is the fun in that? Before she could respond, I detected a heavy set of steps to my left and turned to see a man built similarly to the bouncer outside, but more heavily cyberized with obvious heavy modifications to his head. He gave me a short look and grunted a simple, "Rogue will see you now." Before she could respond, I detected a heavy set of steps to my left and turned to see a man built similarly to the bouncer outside, but more heavily cyberized with obvious heavy modifications to his head. Author's notes: a stationary netrunner whose usual task is to defend the local net of a set area. The animals are a juicer, steroid abuser gang, usually working as bouncers and the like. 32, Chapter 32, Rogue. Michael Magos Sobranov. Having left Rebecca back at the bar, I followed the bodyguard deeper into the building, leaving the open guest area and passing by a few private rooms and making a point of not looking into them. It wasn't only Rogue who operated out of the afterlife, and poking my nose into other people's business a good first impression did not make. Not that I was given too much time to consider the option in any case, as we reached our destination pretty quickly. The big lug of a roided-up bodyguard merely standing to the side of the door and not even bothering to look my weapons over, foolishly confident but also reassuring, likely on purpose as well. Best not overthink it and make a fool of myself. The private room was a bit cozier than the rest of the afterlife. The lighting was not nearly as jarring, even if it did follow the same theme of cold blue as the rest of the place, and while the room itself was slightly cramped for my tastes, the seating was spacious and arranged around a low but large table. Just as I was about to enter, the doors were pushed open from inside, and a pair of mercenaries walked out. One of them was a short, black-haired Asian woman who at first glance seemed mundane, but only a quick scan was needed to reveal the heavy amount of sleek cyberization just below her high-grade real skin. The other was a serious-looking Caucasian man, grey, almost white-haired, sharply bearded, and perfectly straight-backed. He was dressed in a well-appointed corpo business suit and seemed to be the image of a distinguished gentleman, I believe the stereotype was. That was, of course, before one realized the suit was actually armored, and the man was sporting a number of gadgets used for combat and infiltration, just barely out of sight. The duo paused only for a half step, both evaluating me just as I did them, and the moment passed as quickly as it came, all three of us sharing a polite nod before they went on their way, and I entered the room they had just left. Unexpectedly, there were only two people inside, both of whom I immediately recognized. Eager, aren't you? The old grey-haired, but not quite ancient woman that was Rogue Amendiares spoke as she saw me enter. "Weren't you the one to invite me?" was the first gut response that came to mind. An attempt to throw me off guard. I thought for a moment before simply walking in and taking a seat on the thankfully resilient bench. "You tell me, Ms. Rogue," is all I said before looking at the room's other occupant, Nix. The short-haired blonde black man with shades over his eyes even while indoors, a fact for which he received no small amount of teasing from my fellow netrunners, gave a short, outwardly uninterested wave. "Magos, finally crawled out of your hole to join the rest of us mortals. Felt like going for a walk for once." I shrugged, happy to see you were doing well for yourself. We had done small bits of business with each other over the years, and he was one of the rare few netrunners who frequented the EdgeNet cafe that I actually believed to be competent. "Could always go for a raise or three." He shrugged, still tapping away at his blocky laptop. The Queen of Fixers didn't seem at all annoyed that I was not immediately focusing on her. In fact, she seemed to have an odd gleam in her eyes for a moment before Nix finished whatever it was he was doing and detached a chip from his device, one he quickly offered to his boss. She made no great show of inserting it into her neck, merely pouring some manner of liquor into an empty glass before sliding it my way. and then twirling her own glass as she read up on whatever was listed on the chip. When Regina first told me about you, I expected we wouldn't be meeting for a few months at least. You sure work fast, kid. Kid meaning she already knew more than I liked, even if it was only to be expected from someone of her caliber. Something tells me it wasn't Regina who first tattled. I returned, giving Nix a pointed look, which he of course ignored. Rogue made an exhale that wasn't quite a huff. Nix tried recommending you a few times, but I don't like throwing children at Corpo AI. Bad for business, that. Not that you'd even take those jobs in the first place. Correct. I admitted easily enough. The rewards may be great, but the risks are simply not worth it. Not even with my hardware. Not confident in your skills. She raised her eyebrows, blatantly provoking me. It isn't a question of getting in or out. I shrugged. The moment I start poking into the big names databases, fixers start demanding I poke just a little bit deeper, until I overreach and my brain is fried. Giving her a pointed look, I added, besides, you know damn well that without deep backing, hacking into corpos is just asking them to bag you and shove your brain into a jar to work for them, or something equally asinine. Her eyes widened slightly, though for whatever reason I couldn't quite guess, and a split second later she was back to her usual self, offering a slight nod at my words. All true. She hummed, twirling her glass again. Still, I have to say, you did more than just poke Biotechnica the other night. I barely held back a groan. Something that would not have been a problem if some people had the slightest bit of self-preservation and learned to keep their damned noses to themselves. Nix chuckled, but even if I knew I'd be recorded, I'd still have done it. I finished. The choice was a pretty easy one, all things considered. The old woman didn't immediately say anything, simply taking a long sip of her drink, while she no doubt went over everything she knew about me and all the motivations my words just implied. An act she was more than proficient in, if the speed at which she finished was any indication. Rare to see someone stick his neck out for his tunes in Night City. Try the whole earth, I deadpanned, to which she actually chuckled. And what of your tiger claw friends? She asked lightly. Should I expect this same loyalty to extend to them? My look turned utterly flat at that final probe. Please do not pretend Wakako hasn't already told you everything there is to know about my arrangement with her son. You are not that incompetent. The old woman huffed in either annoyance or approval. I wasn't quite sure. Almost forgot you were a teen under all that chrome. Fear not, the hormones are in good order. I deadpanned, much to her growing amusement. But we aren't here to talk about my cerebral development. You said we had biz to discuss, so discuss away. Rogue looked like she considered probing me for a bit longer, but ultimately decided she had already gotten more than enough from me tonight. Fine, I have a big gig coming up that is missing a solo. You know how to keep your mouth shut? Or not, apparently. Yes, I waved impatiently. Please, do go on. Good. She showed no outward reaction, but I knew she was cackling at me in her mind. The Hag, a Militech convoy, is set to enter Night City in 3 days, carrying some new combat drone design of theirs. My client has requested at least one, but preferably multiple, examples of the tech to be delivered to them in one piece. Are we ambushing or stealing? I asked, already running through the scenario even with the barest hint of information she gave me. Stealing, she answered simply. The convoy will have heavy protection and move only in the open. And just throwing meat at the problem would be wasteful. I nodded, and loud. Quite. She hummed and lit up a cigar, pausing to take a drag before continuing. I already have a team for the infiltration, but they are lacking a heavy hitter, and their netrunner only does quick hacking. He is competent but limited in what he can do, so that is where you fall in. And our exfil when things go wrong? I asked. Not if. She raised an eyebrow. I know what I said. Her lips quirked upwards. 2 drivers will be waiting on standby, both in different directions, and both with rides that can outrun corpo pursuit. You'll get more details in the briefing. Right. That was perfectly acceptable. And what of my team? You'd think this discussion would be much more productive if they were here. The 2 of them know to trust my judgment, Rogue said simply. Passed your test, did I? I drawled. It was a bit annoying, but I couldn't really fault the process. I would be the first to vet the shit out of people I had to trust not to fuck me over. and Rogue had a reputation to maintain. Now, I had to see if what I've been told about you was true. She didn't bat an eye as she answered, "You can't rely on reputation when it comes to sensitive biz." "Reasonable? Good." She nodded. "Nix will provide you a chip with all the details." "Getting a bit ahead of ourselves, no?" I cut her off, leaning forward ever so slightly. She paused, narrowing her eyes as she did. "Is there a problem?" I merely stared, for damn near a full minute. Finally, Rogue allowed herself a tiny smirk. "Payout is 2 mil. 2.5 if you get 2 drones and 3 if you get 3. My cut is 40%, and the rest gets equally split between the 3 of you." I pretended to consider it briefly before nodding slowly. "Fine, I am in." "Nova," she said dryly. "Nix, the chip." My fellow netrunner nodded, and moments later I was holding a pretty advanced data chip in my hand. I did not care in the slightest about them seeing me blatantly scanning the thing for damn near a minute before inserting it into my neuroport, and the moment I did, I was bombarded with a sea of information. Everything from the aforementioned exfil drivers to the storage area's outline to its defenses and the very schedules of the guards. The reason why a fixer could reasonably take as much as Rogue did was because it was her job to provide all the information and support necessary for the gig as the middleman, and Rogue definitely did her job well. The only thing that bothered me was the complete lack of information on my fellow mercenaries. Well, everything save for their names and contact information, lacking even a picture. Seemingly noticing my apprehension, Rogue spoke up. "The duo you will be working with are professionals, so don't worry about them chasing a legend while on the job." I was pretty loud about that one, wasn't I? I muttered, not quite annoyed but close. The Queen of Fixers merely looked at me with amusement at that comment briefly, before going on as if I had said nothing at all. "They've done a number of gigs for me in the past, so try not to antagonize them too much and listen to what they have to say. So long as they aren't gonks, I will not bitch about them having more experience." I deadpanned, "if they are polite about it." You'd think that was granted in this line of biz, but she shrugged as if to say, "It is what it is. Anyway, it is up to you 3 to come up with an approach with all the info I gave you. Contact them and set up a meeting. You have 3 days to get ready." Nodding along, I asked, just in case, "I'm guessing Militech isn't planning on keeping their bots locked up for too long?" Her answer surprised me. "Most probably." "You don't know?" "Despite whatever the kids say, I'm not all-knowing," she pointed out dryly, "which is why we won't be taking that risk. I want this done quickly and efficiently, and preferably with Militech none the wiser." Doubtful. I couldn't help but quip, "But one can hope." "Who knows, you might just surprise yourself." She shrugged, lip curled up slightly, "But that is up to the 3 of you." Message received. I mock saluted with my drink and downed the excellent, or what I thought was excellent anyway, whiskey in one gulp before preparing to get up. "Is there anything else, Ms. Rogue?" "Don't die, kid. I'll take your advice to heart." I rolled my eyes and got up. "Have a pleasant evening." I was tempted to hack into the room as I left, just to see what they'd say behind my back. But that would a breach of trust that would see me swiftly and silently blacklisted, so I held back despite the low chance I'd ever be detected. Instead, I focused back on the matter at hand and scrolled through the info chip in my neck. Moments later, I found what I was looking for and sent out a call. A familiar face appeared in the corner of my eye, revealing the same man I saw leave Rogue's parlor when I arrived. "Magos, Mr. Sharp, we meet again." There was no visible reaction on his face at my greeting. "J. Sharp, a small world we live in, Mr. Magos." His voice was deep and cultured, with an odd accent not native to North Carolina. "Quite," I huffed. "Ms. Rogue sent me your way for the repo job. When can we meet?" He must have already received confirmation from the fixer herself, because there was no apprehension or hesitation to his response. "How does 3 p.m. tomorrow in the afterlife sound to you?" "Perfectly doable." I hummed, "Anything I need to prepare in advance?" "Just your mind." The man's mustache twitched ever so slightly upwards. "It will be a long discussion." "Very well. See you then." "See you then, Mr. Magos." The call ended and I frowned. Was that how I sounded to everyone else? Weird. Shaking my head, I decided to just not think about it and return to the afterlife proper, once more being slammed by the wave of noise as I weaved through the by now incredibly dense crowd. The place was still a bar, and mercs liked to party. Who would have thunk it? Thankfully, I found Rebecca exactly where I left her, waving her beer bottle around while discussing something with the bartender. "Mikey," she beamed at me as she saw me approach. "How did it go?" "Pretty well," I said, absently waving off the bartender's question if I wanted a drink. "I got myself a gig, though no details to share, I am afraid." She pouted for a moment before grinning. "That's fine. Wanna dance?" I did not often feel fear, but the spike of hesitation I felt at that question came pretty damn close. "I have no idea how." Her grin widened. "Better learn quickly then." She chirped and promptly dragged me off from the bar and into the writhing crowd. "We are never doing that again," I muttered as I dragged us out of the afterlife into the cold night air and freedom from the accursed stampede within. "But you were so good at it. You only sent 3 people flying." Rebecca cackled from atop my shoulder. "It was a nightmare." I shook my head and pretend shivered, ignoring the odd warmth in my internals I couldn't explain. Too much person, too little space. We reached my van quickly enough, and just as I was about to reach for her, Rebecca spoke up. "Hey, Mike." "Yeah?" I asked, tilting my head up sideways to find her looking slightly hesitant. That hesitance lasted only for a moment as she faced me and with determination in her eyes, grabbed the sides of my face before leaning in. "Wanna be my input?" I blinked, brain freezing momentarily, and my mouth moved before it could reboot. "Sure." She grinned and then dragged my face forward into a kiss that was as awkward as it was pleasant. 33, Chapter 33, Interludes. The aspiring solo. "You sure I can't interest you in a new ride, Jaquito?" The far too amused voice of the fixer rang out in his mind. "You know El Capitan always has the only best offers." Jackie Wells let out an audible groan. "Fuck's sake, Cap. I already told you it wasn't my ride." "No need to be ashamed, Jackie," Muammar Reyes cackled. "You can appreciate the classics as much as you like. I won't judge. Much." "Man, fuck you, Cap." Jackie rolled his eyes. "You got a gig for me or not?" All right. I've had my fun." The man let out a final chuckle. "I don't have anything immediate, but I'll need a package grabbed tomorrow, so be ready in the morning." "Thanks, Cap. Call you then." Jackie sighed and ended the call. "God fucking damn it, Mike," he grumbled as he rolled out of the ratty couch in his garage and naturally immediately jabbed his hip into the edge of his coffee table. He knew this shit would happen. But no, apparently the crazy deathborg he liked to call a friend found his comments about the Mahir absolutely fucking hilarious instead of the advice they were and decided to turn the whole thing into a war machine, while not changing the look one tiny bit. And now everyone thought it was his ride and not the Borg's. Because why would a full Borg drive a fucking Mahir of all things? Something told him at least part of it was on purpose, just to fuck with him. He just stayed there, staring into the ceiling and ignoring the pain of the uncomfortable position for a few minutes before grumbling some more and finally getting his ass up. Now freshly dressed and still only half awake, Jackie stumbled into the Coyote Cojo. "Mañana, Pepe," he waved at the bartender. "Slow morning." "Jackie?" the older man greeted absently. "Finally up and about?" "Eh, you know how it is." He shrugged. Taking a seat at a bar stool and accepting the steaming cup of coffee his friend started making the moment he stepped into the Coyote. Even a Wells has to chill out for a bit after a day like that. Funny way to explain hiding away from curious chums. Pepe rolled his eyes. "Weren't you trying to get famous before?" Jackie's smile turned strained. "Dunno what you're talking about, Pepe." And seeing the man's dubious look, he decided to change topics. "So, how is the family doing?" Pepe rolled his eyes at the blatant attempt, but still shrugged and answered, "Hey, Cynthia's been getting all twisted up about little Marcello finally going to school. Doesn't want him getting in with a bad crowd. The other Haywood boys will stick with him." Jackie shrugged it off. "Doesn't mean she isn't wrong to worry, but not much she can do except hover, and that's just a bad idea all around." "That's what I told her," Pepe complained. "But you know how she gets." Yeah. Jackie nodded, taking a deep sip of his coffee. "Still a lovely woman." The love of my life, Pepe beamed. And speaking of lovely women, his tone turned conspiratorial, teasing, when is Jaquito Wells going back on the market? Laughing at the man's question, Jackie made sure to give the coyote a quick once-over, secure in the knowledge that his mother wasn't going to pop up and complain about his choices. Again, he answered, don't tell Mama, but I got a date lined up in 2 days. Why not tell her? Pepe furrowed his brows. You dating a joy toy or something? Nothing like that. Jackie's eye twitched. Misty and I are just starting out, so there is no point in rushing it. I don't buy it. Pepe immediately says, you were never secretive about your outputs before. Jackie frowns and then sighs, all right. She has some odd hobbies, and you know how me mama gets about those things. I'm just not sure the two of them would click. The bartender just stared at him for a good long minute before snorting, that is the dumbest excuse I've heard in a while. Well, it is all you are getting. Jackie huffed, but before the conversation could go any further, he got a message from a friend. Gus. Hey Jack, you down for some drinks with the boys tonight? Jackie Wells. What kind of a question is that, Gustavo? Just making sure. We'll be partying at mi hermano's penthouse, so dress nice. The Orta's penthouse, sign him the fuck up. Anything goes nice with the Wells charm. You know this, Gus. Yeah, I'm already afraid of the ladies falling over themselves. As you should be. By the way, you heard about your tomb? The Borg you've been bragging about? Jackie frowned. Something happen? Nothing bad, just dude has been seen going to the afterlife. Thought you should know. It took him a few seconds to respond. Thanks, Gus. Woke up pretty late, so this is the first I am hearing of it. No prob, Choom. See ya tonight. See ya. The silence stretched, and it didn't take long for Pepe to notice something was off. Everything all right, Jack? Jackie blinked. Nah, it is all good. Just thinking about something. The bartender hummed, eyebrow slightly raised, and then pretended to focus on the dirty mugs below him while still observing Jackie, who had already retreated into his own little world, unaware or just uncaring of the observation. He knew Mike was something special from the first moment he saw him. Now that specialty may have seemed to be the fact he was even alive with whatever the fuck had happened to him that left him looking like a tiny human nugget with an oversized head. But he was quickly disabused of that when he watched the literal teen rip his way out of a shitty life through sheer grit and effort. And then things just kept escalating into more and more insanity on an almost daily basis. Now sure, Jackie could accept that someone like that would end up in the afterlife pretty damn quickly. But the fact it happened this fast left him feeling a whole load of emotional whiplash. What the fuck was he even doing with his life? And why did Mike not even bother to tell him about it? Did the Borg know him better than he knew himself and knew how he'd react? Did it even matter? It all left Jackie feeling lost and a bit bitter, even if he hated to admit it. He knew he was wrong to feel that way. Hell, he was half tempted to slap the stupid out of himself the moment the thought first occurred. But no matter how much he tried, he just couldn't shake the sting he was feeling, and he soon felt his shoulders sinking ever so slightly as his thoughts began to spiral. A loud clink ripped him out from the descent, his eyes snapping back into focus to see a double tequila still swirling from the impact placed in front of him. He looked up to see Pepe giving him a flat look. You look like you needed one. He blinked and then sighed. Yeah. He grabbed the glass and downed it. Thanks, Pepe. Want to talk about it? The older man asked. He paused and shook his head. I'm good. He exhaled and got up. I need to go get some air, need to clear my head. The bartender merely shrugged and left him to it. Jackie Wells soon found himself on the roof of the Coyote, looking out into the skyline of central Night City while his thoughts drifted each and every way, never letting him fully calm no matter how much he attempted it. Ultimately, his anger turned from without to within, and he almost snarled at the questions to his self-worth, glaring into the distance while he wrestled with himself. He was not some jealous gonk kid who couldn't take being upstaged like a little bitch. He'd just have to catch up, in his own way. Slowly but surely, the anger and self-loathing withered away, leaving behind only determination. The mother. Thanks for coming with, Misty. Svetlana smiled at her friend. I know you have a lot of work to do without worrying over me almost every day. Oh, will you stop with that already? The younger woman rolled her eyes good-naturedly. I already told you a bunch of times I don't mind hanging out with you. You are a friend before you are a patient. Yes, well, the grey-haired cyborg looked away. I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't, Lana. The sometimes nurse, sometimes mystic huffed, sidestepping closer to her friend and leading her further down the kabuki marketplace. So stop thinking about it and instead tell me what kind of paint you wanted for your walls. Svetlana hummed, looking over the many stalls. Mikey really likes red. Oh, come on, Misty groaned. Red is terrible and you know it. I know. She laughed lightly, just imagining the face he'd make when he saw it. Those words made Misty pause. Can he even make faces? She immediately regretted asking, but thankfully her friend didn't seem to mind. It is subtle, but a mother notices these things. Svetlana looked up proudly before frowning. As much as I'd like for him to look, well, normal, he could have changed himself 100 times already if he wanted to, and I don't want to pressure him with my expectations. Isn't that what mothers are supposed to do? Misty tilted her head. He doesn't need me to tell him how to live his life. Svetlana sighed over the noises of the many stall owners hawking their wares. He is all grown up already, and I don't think he wants me butting in. Lana, you are being a gonk. Misty lightly chopped her shoulder, her hand easily bouncing off the third-gen chrome hidden under the older woman's clothes. Of course he needs your help. Michael might be among the smartest people in the city, but that doesn't make him not a teenager. If only things were that simple. Svetlana sighed, picking out can of a harsh grey for the workshop and a light beige for the living room. Why not make it simple? Misty asked with a teasing hum. Just talk to him about it. She tilted her head with a small smirk. If he is as much of a genius as you say, he should know better than to ignore you. No need to bait me, Misty, Svetlana grumbled. I know you are right. And you best remember it. She pointed at her with a wink. The two of them kept chatting as they toured nearly the entire market, buying everything the Sobranovs' apartment might need, and many things it would probably not. Contrary to her worries about her son's feelings, Svetlana felt not even slightly bad about spending his money. He was the one insisting she did no work, and being grumpy about him being the provider was just downright stupid, so she wasn't going to waste time contemplating it, especially since he was the one who insisted on it to begin with. Besides, it wasn't like she was spending it on drugs or something equally vile. By the time the duo were finally done with their shopping, Svetlana's cybernetic arms were both lightly buckling under the sheer mass of random knickknacks, and even Misty was not spared from having to do her part in hauling. Finally satisfied, they began their trek back to Misty's car, which is just about the moment the world decided, how about no? A massive crowd had gathered around the main exit from the market, where a fistfight had broken out between two Tiger Claw recruits, and of course it didn't take long for the whole thing to spiral into an improvised fighting ring, with the cops themselves watching and betting along. Needless to say, getting their bags through a crowd like that intact was a pipe dream. Svetlana knew she could simply name-drop Mike, and there was a good chance the Tigers would guide them through without any issue. But she also knew there was a small chance they were members of the small faction of the gang hostile to him, and drawing attention for mere convenience was poor practice no matter what you were doing. Which meant that, inevitably, Misty and Svetlana decided to exit via one of the many unwatched alleyways surrounding the marketplace. A choice that left the younger woman increasingly worried with each and every step they took away from the main venue. And the world saw fit to justify her fears near immediately as the racket their cargo produced was quickly noticed by the many bums and druggies who made their chosen exit their home, and a quartet of very dirty young men stood up and surrounded them before they could pass the distance. Only 2 of them had shirts on, and all 4 had bats of some kind, and they all smelled of cheap drugs to Svetlana's improved olfactory senses. Well. The apparent toothless leader of the band drawled like a shitty D-lister actor. What have we here? Misty's eyes flickered between the druggies and Svetlana, and she felt her heart jolt when she saw her friend's completely blank expression. Immediately she looked back to the man. Please, just let us pass. We aren't looking for trouble. She waved her hands to indicate just how bad of a fucking idea this all was, but inevitably went ignored. Let you pass. The man squared his non-existent shoulders. "You hear that, boys?" The three other men laughed and jeered like a shitty bandit troupe from pre-crash Western movies. A small part of Misty's mind couldn't help but imagine all of it sounded much, much cooler in the quartet's minds. Before they actually said it, if the light wince of their youngest-looking member was any indication. "Now see here, girl," the leader sneered and took a step forward. "This here alley is our territory, so how about you two?" He reached for Svetlana's shoulder. Svetlana blinked. She took a slow breath, completely unbothered by the sudden smell of blood and gut and excreta assailing her nose, and turned back to the shaking Misty. "You coming?" The blood-covered nurse gulped and carefully stepped over the four corpses, mangled beyond any recognition, and hopped after her friend, though she did keep a few feet of distance at all times despite herself. "Are you—" Misty's breath caught at the sharp attention. "Are you good?" Svetlana, covered head to toe in what was probably a fifth of a whole human, shrugged. "Why wouldn't I be?" Misty exhaled, feeling a profound sense of defeat, before nodding rapidly and hefting her bag. "Let's just get you back home, yeah?" They had agreed to go to Misty's and visit Vic while they were at it, but something told her that wasn't the best of ideas right now. Svetlana blinked, and suddenly her combative stance disappeared, as if she only just realized what she had done. Yeah, that might be for the best. Their return was silent and tense, neither of them willing to speak up about what happened. The neighbors dutifully ignored them as they passed them by, and only once they entered Svetlana's home did either of them start relaxing. That was until Michael walked out of his workshop, dressed only in a pair of pants and carrying a dirtied tray of what looked to have been messily prepared breakfast, only to completely still at the sight of them. Immediately his entire body tensed, golden eyes narrowing. "Mum, what the fuck happened? Why are you covered in blood?" She felt a rapidly growing panic at getting caught. She didn't want to worry him more than she did every day, so actually answering was out of the question. And it just so happened her enhanced senses caught something she could use as a redirection. "And why do you smell like a girl, son?" she fired back. The tray in Michael's hands fell onto the floor, and he promptly stepped up to the wall, stared at it for a good second, and then slammed his head against it. This is exactly when a fourth person made themselves known. As a short girl Svetlana barely recognized from the video of her son's now famous rescue, peeked out of the workshop dressed only in one of his hoodies and looking incredibly drowsy. "Mike, what the fuck is happening?" Rebecca mumbled. Feeling his mother's expectant look and her unvoiced squeal of excitement, Michael smacked his head against the wall a second time. 34, Chapter 34, Morning Scare. Rebecca, she felt her nose twitch as she was woken up by the divine smell of fresh burrito. Her eyes opened groggily, leaving her momentarily confused at the sight of an unfamiliar ceiling before the events of the previous night slammed back into place, making her let out a small, satisfied giggle. She was so not going to be able to walk today, wasn't she? "What is so funny?" A synthetic voice snapped her out of it, and she looked down to see the source of her ailment looking at her from atop a stool. She went to sit up and was surprised that she was actually able to, the complete soreness she expected from yesterday's fun nowhere near as bad as she thought it'd be. She dragged herself back against the pillow, she leaned against the wall and looked back to her input with questioning eyes, to which he merely exhaled in amusement and asked, "Feeling all right?" Holding back a grumble, Rebecca gave him a quick once-over and immediately pouted, "That is so not fair." His golden eyes flashed with mirth as he shrugged. "It isn't my fault you cling to the weakness of your flesh." He droned sarcastically before standing up, a steaming tray that she realized was the source of the smell in his hands. Her eyes widened, and she found herself holding back a delighted squeal as she realized what was going on. She sniffed at the food in her lap and looked back up imperiously. "You feed me." Mike didn't hesitate for even a moment. "No." "Mean." She pouted but did start chomping the burrito down like a starved beast a mere second later, faux glaring at the amused cyborg the entire time. Something that only served to amuse him, if the light, challenging look he gave her was any indication. She ignored the anticipatory shiver that passed through her body at the sight and the sudden heat around her ears and focused on filling the ravenous void in her stomach instead. The amount of hunger she felt was almost too ridiculous. But she had other things to focus on, and so she quickly forgot about it. Like making sure things were clear between her and the badass, intelligent, super competent gonk who saved her ass, gave her the wildest night of her life, and then to top it all off, brought her breakfast afterwards. "We are mainlines now," she declared. He blinked, tilting his head slightly. "I thought that was obvious." Faced with the sheer earnestness that simply did not belong on the same continent as Night City, she failed to stop the peal of delighted laughter from leaving her. In fact, she felt it deserved a reward and gave her input the look. Later, he chuckled and walked out of the workshop/room. Rebecca ignored the twinge of disappointment she felt and was just about to succumb to her body's desire for a nap before she heard rising voices in the other room, unfamiliar female voices. Wasn't his mom supposed to be visiting a friend for the whole day? She frowned, and she found she was too curious to just shrug it off. She hesitantly rejected the snug embrace of her blanket and got up, the cool metal floor biting her feet with no footwear in sight as she went to compensate for the inevitable wobbling. Except she found her balance to be perfectly fine. Weird. She narrowed her eyes and grabbed the closest article of clothing to her, that being Mike's hoodie that was so large it felt more like a dress to someone of her size. She held down a yawn, and just as a nearby wall rang out with a thump, she stepped out of the room, finding herself staring at two blood-covered women while Mike was busy smacking his head against the wall. Ignoring the sudden need to pinch herself, she looked at her clearly distressed input. "Mike, what the fuck is happening?" The taller and bloodier woman raised her eyebrow at him. "Michael Margot Sobranov." Unfortunately, the concussive force of my forehead meeting the wall was insufficient to knock me out and spare me further suffering, so with a long-suffering sigh, I looked back to Mom and Misty. "You can tease me later. What happened?" Thankfully, my tone and a warning look from Misty was enough for her to finally take things seriously, and the two of them quickly recounted the events of their shopping trip. Good news? It was just a bunch of unaugmented druggies she painted across the alleyway. Literally barely worth the breath it took to mention them. Bad news? She was obviously suffering from some kind of jitters despite not feeling disturbed consciously, which meant it was a subconscious issue, which meant things were getting worse. Or they were already this bad, and she finally got the chance to slip. Fuck. "How about the two of you clean yourselves up while I order us some food?" I proposed patiently. "We can talk things over when you've had the time to cool down." Mom caught on to my perceived attempt at redirection almost immediately, but that was more than enough time for Misty to start pushing her into the bathroom, and she had no defense against the younger woman's pleading gaze. The moment the doors shut behind them, I looked at Rebecca. "Sorry, don't be a gonk." She smacked my forearm and then held onto it. "Come on, we should find them some clothes." Despite the tense situation, all I could do as I was dragged towards the nearby closet was smile. Stress eating seemed to be a commonality between Misty, myself, and Mom as we chewed through the pizzas I ordered like a bunch of human buzzsaws. Well, in my case it was quite literal, but I had to admit the two of them made an impressive showing of it. Not that it stopped Mom from doing the inevitable the moment she caught her breath. She looked at Rebecca, pausing briefly at her visible mox markings, gave me a sideways glance, and addressed her. "So how did the two of you meet?" And of course, being the little shit that she was, Rebecca immediately began recounting the entire event, while doing her utmost to make everything I did sound as embarrassing as humanly possible. I did not enjoy the shine in my mother's eyes as she noticed what was going on. The slumping of my shoulders and eventually my groans of despair only fueled the two devils onwards as they seemed to compete in which one could make me desire the sweet release of death more. By the time they were done, I was face down in what remained of my pizza, my soul long since having left my body. When I got up, the three of them looked supremely amused, and Mom gave me a proud and approving look. "Good pick, Mikey." Rebecca beamed, throwing her hands up in overdramatic celebration. "Success." Things got a lot less painful for me after that, as the conversation drifted away from everyone gang up on Mike to simpler small talk. Though Mum did make it a point to suddenly, and non-so-subtly, question Rebecca about her involvement with the Mox's usual business. I was a bit baffled by how relieved I felt when she replied in the negative. The suddenness of it all did make the air a slight bit awkward for a while, but thankfully Rebecca didn't take the question too badly, going as far as to send me some teasing messages during the whole thing. Ultimately, though, both Misty and Rebecca had to leave and accepted my offer of transportation as they did. I was hesitant to leave, but a quick internal conversation with Misty made it clear I needed some advice from someone far more experienced in these matters than I was, which meant it was time to pay Vic a visit. "Thanks for the ride, Mike. I'll call you later," Rebecca chirped, hopping up and giving me a quick peck before running off back into the pile of rust that surrounded her and her team's safe house. I was surprised she made no comment about my lack of features even once, so much so I ended up staring after her for much longer than intended. Only when Misty loudly cleared her throat did I blink away. "Sorry." "Oh, I don't mind," she chuckled. "I'm happy you found someone who accepts you for who you are." Closing my eyes at my exact feelings being pointed out, I shook my head. "You always know exactly what to say, don't you?" "It's a talent." She smirked, but then her posture slumped slightly, and she turned serious. "We best get going to Vic's. Lana is starting to worry me." "She will be fine," I ground out even as I started the engine. She had to be. The veteran Ripperdoc was at first quite cheerful when the two of us arrived. That all turned upside down as Misty recounted the day's events, and the man began nervously tapping his arm against his table halfway through the conversation, which only made me start tapping my foot like the nervous wreck I was as well. Vic exhaled as Misty finished, leaning back into his seat before offering his concise commentary on the whole thing. "Fuck. Fuck is putting it mildly." I scoffed bitterly. "You got any advice for me, Vic?" For a moment he looked hesitant to give me his real answer, but he quickly shoved that down. "Did you check for any rejection?" He began listing almost automatically: incompatibility, software issues, damage in the nerve implants. "Is she taking her medication on schedule?" Of course I checked. I did my utmost not to snap the words out. "Everything is in perfect order, Vic. You know I don't half-ass my work." "I know, kid." He exhaled, just making sure. Absently nodding along, I passed my hand along my smooth head under a reflex I did not even know I had. "I know she is still mostly fine, and that I am probably overreacting. But how long will that last? How long until she can't pretend everything is perfectly fine anymore and something cracks?" "Her situation is unique." Vic spoke up after a moment of deep consideration, unable to hide the morbid bafflement from his voice. "She is one of the rare few people in this city with that much chrome that isn't dealing with cyberpsychosis, but its more natural cousin." "What? The fuck? That makes absolutely no sense." "Process of elimination, Mike." Victor Vector pointed out the obvious. Cyberpsychosis is simply normal psychosis exacerbated by the use of cyberware. You know this much. He pointed at me, and if your work is as perfect as you claim, then that means the issue is more natural. Well, yes, but did you think trauma wasn't a thing before we started replacing parts of ourselves with metal? He interrupted me. "You can't keep pretending you don't know what I am talking about. This isn't something you can just fix, Mike." "So what the fuck do I do?" I stood up, hands clutching at the air futilely. "Exactly what you've been doing so far," he answers simply, leaving me flat-footed. "We've been over this. This isn't something that can just be gotten over. You have to give her time, as much time as you can get her where her trauma doesn't have any reasons to flare up." "I can't just lock her up, Vic," I snapped back. He didn't so much as twitch at my raised voice, or the subtle threat in my posture. "I know, kid, I know." He breathed out. "But short of wiping her memory, all you can do is give her time. Probably years of it. Don't even think about suggesting a brain wipe unironically." I nearly growled, mostly at the tiny part of myself that was tempted by the idea, if only as the final option. "Just pointing the next best option out." He scoffed. "Not much else I can do beside that. Well, except one thing that I thought was supposed to be pretty damned obvious." My neck snapped in his direction so fast I heard my spine creak. "Trust your mother," Vic admonished with narrowed eyes. "She is stronger than you think, and has been through hell. She is the one recovering, not you." He pointed at me as I went to respond, cutting me off. "I know you have only the best of intentions in mind, but she needs your support, kid, not your oversight." "Right." I nodded, looking down to hide my shame and no doubt failing. I clutched my hand into a fist and looked back up at him with what I hoped was determination in my eyes. I guess I'll just have to make sure she has everything she will ever need to recover fully. I looked at the blonde next to me. Can I keep counting on your help, Misty? Of course, she answered with a small, reassuring smile. Good. I nodded for a few moments. Good. I repeated and straightened my back. Thank you for your help, both of you. Sure thing, kid, Vic snorted, looking me over. You look like you need a drink. Yeah, I exhaled sharply. I could go for a beer. We spent the next hour in much less panicked discussion, as both Vic and Misty coached me in exactly what not to do from now on. I did not enjoy the realization that my constant walking on eggshells around her most likely only made things worse, but instead of panicking like an idiot, I did the reasonable thing and swore I would be and do better. My resolve was tested the moment I arrived back home around midday, and I found the apartment had completely transformed in the few hours I was gone. Most of the furniture was covered up, and my mother was currently humming a tune while painting the walls in a relatively pleasant beige color. The news on the television behind her, talking about some inane new fashion trend, I found I was physically incapable of registering even if I wanted to. Immediately, I felt my worry spiking at the sight of her, and for a moment I was greatly tempted to tell her to rest up due to everything that happened earlier. But Vic's lesson replayed in my head, and I understood that sometimes pretending everything was fine until it actually became fine was the only way to move forward. I utterly despised pretending. It disgusted me, and doubly so when it concerned family, but I smiled and waved at her greeting despite it, and immediately began helping her with her redecoration. The suspicious looks she kept sending me for nearly an hour stung a bit, but after a while she ended up relaxing, and we spent the rest of the day finishing up the room's new look, leaving the apartment looking almost unrecognizable. I returned to my workshop feeling paradoxically both lighter and heavier, and whiled the remaining hour away as I worked on my next implant project and chatted with Rebecca on my agent. Time passed at a crawl, but despite it, morning arrived in an inevitable blink, and with it my meeting with Rogue's team. Here is to hoping planning the demise of a bunch of corpos will serve as a good enough distraction. 35. Chapter 35. Meeting the team. The surroundings of the afterlife were much calmer during daytime, it seemed, leaving the small alcove leading up to the main entrance looking almost abandoned, save for a couple of randoms skulking in the corners here and there. The place was also almost suspiciously clean for Night City. Not free of garbage, of course, but it registered as notable anyway. A few of the hangers-on looked like they recognized me as I passed them by, and a few others immediately began excitedly whispering amongst each other, but, to my immense relief, contrary from one might immediately expect from the pseudo-celebrity status afterlife mercs, the fans usually had the self-preservation instincts to keep their heads down and not bother us. Being a paid mass murderer was surprisingly peaceful, when one was not doing the mass murdering anyway. I was quickly waved in by the same animal bouncer/bodyguard from last time, and I strolled into the surprisingly quiet bar, seeing only 10 patrons inside. No point in overthinking it. I reminded myself and took a seat in one of the corners with a better view of the place and waited for Claire to come get my order. Except before that could happen, a face I never really expected to see again caught my eye, and I his evidently, as the shorter man with greyish hair I distinctly remembered stitching back together from near brain death, noticed me just as quickly, his eyes widening in recognition a moment before he made his excuses to his chums and practically ran over to where I was seated. "Hey," he waved as he approached. "You are Margos, right?" "That is indeed I." I nodded, and knowing he wanted to speak, I wordlessly pointed my open hand at the seat opposite me. His eyes brightened slightly, and he quickly took the offer. "Man," he breathed out as he gave me a look over. "When Regina sent me the recording, I thought she was fucking with me. But we really have a Borg in the afterlife, huh?" It was bound to happen at some point. I made it a point to shrug dismissively before waving the bartender over, a whiskey and Nicola for me. "I'll have the same," the man added absently before focusing back on me and offering his hand. "Tiny Mike, pleasure to meet you." I shook the hand and nodded. "I hope you recovered well enough?" I was curious, but I didn't want to bother Ms. Jones. I asked, "Such a tender soul you are." He chuckled and nodded. "Whatever magic chemistry you performed kept me alive long enough for the doc to put me back together, but even then it was a close call." He shook his head. "But it all worked out in the end, so thanks for that. Just don't try going against a fully bogged-out psycho next time. Or at least not alone," I said dryly. "The results tend to be something of a self-fulfilling prophecy." "Ah, but what is life without a bit of adventure?" He spread his arms, but I could detect he was fucking with me, which was quickly proven true as he raised them a moment later. "Just kidding, of course. I learnt my lesson this time." His whole expression darkened then. "Next time I'll just bring a bigger gun." I blinked and then emitted a snort. "That works too." The drinks arrived as we spoke, and I clinked my shot glass against that of Tiny Mike, downing it all in one gulp before washing it down with another of Nicola. And dear Jesus Christ, there was so much damned caffeine in the thing, I wouldn't be surprised if it could wake the dead if administered quickly enough. "Not a fan?" My fellow Mike quirked an eyebrow, slowly slurping his own cola. "Tastes fine." I shrugged, was just scanning the contents. Both his eyebrows rose at that. "Do I even want to know?" "No." I deadpanned. "No, you do not." He made an A sound, as if to say I was probably right, and just kept sipping without a singular fuck given. "So," I leaned back a bit, "did you only come here to thank me, or just thought I might get to know the one who pulled me out of that fuck-up is all?" He shrugged. "Not like you are doing much else right now." "Waiting for someone," I confirmed and looked at my internal chronometer. 20 minutes left. "Well, in that case," Tiny Mike began, and we spent the rest of the time discussing our experiences on the job, and I made sure to take the opportunity to ask him for tips on what to do and what not to do in different situations. He noticed it, of course, but didn't bat an eye before answering. Sadly, we were not given too much time to get into it, as at 3 p.m. sharp I saw my two prospective teammates entering the bar and immediately making a beeline to the separate room we had reserved for our use. "Our time is up," I interrupted Tiny Mike. "Got to get back to work." "Shame. You are an interesting one." He too started getting up. "Don't be a stranger, yeah?" Instead of answering verbally, I sent him my contact details, to which he smiled and nodded, leaving me on my own. The meeting room rogue reserved for our use was, to my pleasant surprise, actually larger than the one the old Queen used, consisting of a large see-through glass room within the room that had enough space for a dozen people to sit around the central table comfortably. And all of it was covered with a bunch of jamming tech, ensuring no one could spy on what was said. Naturally, I scanned it all just to be sure. It was passable. "Ah, Mr. Magos." James Sharp, the old and well sharp for the lack of a better word, man wearing a neo-militarist suit, greeted me in a politely cheerful tone, as punctual as expected. "Mr. Sharp." I took his hand and shook it and looked to the final third of our team, Miss Kimigawa. The only reaction the Japanese woman had to my greeting and proffered hand was a slight tilt of the head and a downwards twitch that would probably be missed by lower-grade optics. Rude. Yumiko is a bit shy around new people, you see. Sharp easily grabbed my attention. "Come, let us sit. We have much to discuss." I considered offering to fully introduce myself as we all took our seats, but quickly discarded the idea. The names the two of them were using could very well be aliases, and I wasn't even obligated to offer my own anyways. Besides, they didn't exactly ask. Sharp brought out a sleek laptop and placed his copy of Nix's chip into the data port, revealing the same information packet Rogue shared with me earlier. "As you have both learned, our target is Militech Complex N16. The storage facility is located in the Glen and is masquerading as a large office building, leaving most of the actual structure well below ground level, with 6 levels that we know of. Probably exactly 6 if Nix was worth his rep. That could make exfiltration a nightmare," I pointed out, "and I don't think Militech is about to make it easy for us and leave the cargo within reach." "All too true." Sharp nodded in agreement. "Which is why we must employ utmost stealth." "Right." I nodded slowly. "And while I would adore the convenience of a vent system we could all crawl through, I doubt our stealth will go much beyond the 'no one can see you if they are dead' variety." "Precisely." The man didn't bat an eye at the ridiculous insinuation of cutting through a corpo base, which is why our plan must minimize the time spent within the complex in the extreme so that we can escape before reinforcements arrive. I listed through my own data packet before focusing back on the real world before we start planning on how to get ourselves around 200 crack corporate soldiers. And wasn't the fact I considered that possible a trip? How about we first all share what we can do? I am guessing the two of you have already worked together, but I have no idea about your skills outside of what I can observe. We worked together once. Kimigawa cut off whatever Sharp was about to say, her words just a slight bit accented. This old man is just insufferably persistent and follows me everywhere. Ah, you wound me, my dear. Sharp covered his heart, and here I thought we had something true. The sneer on the woman's face could curdle coolant. Not that my deadpan was any less telling. Whatever drama these two had, I didn't want to know. But almost expectedly, James Sharp took it all in stride, never loosing his calm smile that I was slowly starting to be cautious of, and spoke, "Well, I suppose it falls to this old man to start." He cleared his throat. "I'm usually more of a social infiltrator." "Right. But for the purposes of this mission, I am equipped with subdermal armoring and a light suite of biological enhancements. My primary is an Ajax AR, and I can use quick hacks proficiently. At least he is succinct when he wants to be," I noted, even if he probably won't be of as much use once the true fighting starts. Like it or not, some of those corpo grunts probably had more chrome than he did. Seeing as I remained silent, Yumiko Kimigawa took that as her cue and spoke next in a clipped tone. "I'm a combat assassin. I have implants that reduce noise and visibility when needed. Preferred weapon is monowire when infiltrating. Primary is a TKI-20 Shingen, but I also have a PLS as a backup." She let her right arm disassemble to reveal the literal hand cannon as she finished speaking, before allowing it all to return to normal with a satisfying click. Much more useful for the initial stages. I considered, and she probably hid a lot about her other implants. She was too noisy to have just what she said. "Mr. Magos?" Sharp called lightly. I blinked and forced down my annoyance at being so easily distracted. As you can see, I am a full-body conversion cyborg. Anything below high-caliber small arms can't even scratch me, and I have both lynx paw and reinforced joint implants for movement. Kimigawa's eyebrows rose to her hairline at that last note. I use both a crusher and copperhead, as the situation demands, but I can also fight in melee with my thermal katana. I listed off. Aside from that, I am an elite netrunner and a master riper and medic. Sharp managed to keep his face straight, but the small twitch I just barely caught told me how much he wanted to call bullshit. Bullshit. Evidently, Kimigawa had no such compunctions, much to Sharp's chagrin. If you can do all that, why bother doing mercenary work at all? Capital, I deadpanned, an answer that amused Sharp to no end, if his mustache's twitching was any indication. The so-called combat assassin, on the other hand, still looked doubtful. "Consider this, Ms. Kimigawa," I said after a moment of silence. "Why would I lie about something upon which all of our lives will depend in the heat of the moment?" She narrowed her eyes before clicking her tongue and looking away. Sharp, seeing the opportunity to redirect the conversation, quickly did so. "Now that we have all been properly introduced," his mustache twitched, "let's get into the meat of it. We must have no doubts about our approach and timing, unless we wish to have our names end up on a bottle label. Don't forget additional equipment upgrades," I added before he could get into it. The more I think about it, the more I realize surviving this without enough firepower is a pipe dream. Kimigawa hesitated only briefly before shrugging, and Sharp grinned. "You are of course correct, Mr. Magos, but let us take things step by step first, yes?" And so we did. For 5 hours, I think I knew more about the damned complex than the architects by the time we were done. And let me tell you, I had criticisms to deliver, in person. Now back home, I was slouched over my personal computer, looking over the strings of data uploading onto the final anti-netrunner chip. It took a bit of convincing, but the duo inevitably accepted the fact I could in fact turn a simple chip into an impromptu ICE implant, and no one wanted to be vulnerable to netrunners any more than necessary. which meant I would have to spend hours upon hours waiting for the program to properly compile before scanning it just in case. Was it foolish to give these away for free? Probably in some sense, but I needed the people watching my back to not be at risk of spontaneous and terminal implant combustion, and while both of them admitted to having ICE implants, the extra security would take a load off my own mind and thus allow me to focus more easily. Jackie's experience had taught me much about the freshly named NetHobbler chip, and I managed to extract a lot of data when the gonk returned it as I expected him to, which of course made the new versions that much more streamlined and effective. I wasn't a complete gonk about it though, and installed a program that would delete all the data on the chip exactly 12 hours after they were inserted into a neural port. The computer ejected the chip a moment later, and I placed it into a special plastic case for protection until delivery. Thankfully, I didn't spend the rest of the day doing just that, as I only needed to look over the installation process from time to time. What I was most focused on was my newest implant, and I couldn't help the satisfied grin from forming on my face as I flicked on my internal music player and the familiar recording of organ music, mixed with just the slightest touch of techno, began playing in my mind. My chair's servo arms began moving just as I programmed them to, and a moment later I felt something attached to the new port at the center of my spine, before clamping onto my sides and shoulders and then integrating with the rest of my chassis near seamlessly. With only slight trepidation, I activated the second stage of the process and immediately regretted it as I felt a buzz pass through my brain that was, for a second, even harsher than my biopod installation. If I wasn't sitting, I would have probably fallen over by now. As I was now, I felt myself slouching forward against my own will. Thankfully, my software preparations kicked in less than a second later, and I felt the immense otherness of the mental processing retreat behind an instinctual kind of interface of my own making. Finally sure my biopod wasn't about to start leaking brain matter, I allowed my elation to return and gave my new limb its first command. With clarity and fluidity nearing perfection, a long snake-like appendage moved before my optics, made up of titanium vertebrae joined together with only slight give between each other and ending with 3 pincer-like prongs serving as the manipulator. Artifacts MK. 1 mechadendrite implant detected. Installation complete. External limb software active. Vertebral harmonizer active. External manipulator active. The 3 pincers spread out and snapped back together a few times, each move happening exactly when I wanted it to. With another flicker of thought, the mechadendrite shifted, and with speed far surpassing my other limbs, it shot out to the other end of the room, grabbing a half case of ammunition and bringing it before me without spilling any of the loose bullets out of it. Such was my satisfaction that I couldn't help but gleefully mutter, "Another step beyond flesh." Naturally, it was exactly at this moment the world decided to punish me for my overdramatic proclamation, as I felt my agent buzz and groaned at the name of the caller. It seemed the Tiger Boss was back to play. 36, Chapter 36, The Calm. Isamu Jugo, Okada. Hiya! A high-pitched voice rang out through the dojo as Isamu took a light step back, evading the blow effortlessly and deflecting the training sword away with minimal movement before stepping into his opponent's guard and lightly pushing him back. The kid let out a confused yelp as he lost his footing, his arms flailing about in a panic for a moment before he finally lost his battle with gravity and fell on his ass. Isamu had to hold back a laugh as the child looked up at him with a pout. "You do that every time." This time he did chuckle, "Because you let me," he said and helped the kid up. "You know I won't stop until you correct your posture." "But you always win anyway." The kid crossed his arms and huffed, "Swords suck." Isamu placed a hand over his heart as if wounded. "Ah, betrayed by my own son." "Humph." The kid stuck his nose up, but he could see the joy in his eyes. "Don't worry, Jin," Isamu assured as he ruffled his son's hair. "One day you will put my ass in the dirt too." Before the kid could respond, a familiar voice came from nearby. "Having fun, boys?" his wife asked teasingly. "Dad is bullying me." Jin immediately threw him under the bus. Mischief dancing in her eyes, Akari looked at him. "Really, Isamu? Your own son?" She shook her head in faux disappointment. "I didn't know I married a brute." "Don't gang up on me now." Isamu laughed as he flicked his son's forehead and gave his wife a quick hug, dutifully ignoring her glare as he nearly made her drop the tray she was carrying. Naturally, that earned him a swift swat on the head as he was given his righteous scolding, and soon enough him and his son were enjoying some of the best home-cooked onigiri in the whole world. But such familial idyll could not last forever. "Okada-sama, your guest is here." The voice of his bodyguard rang out through his agent, only a moment before the doors opened on their own. His young ally's near-featureless face made it as difficult to read him as ever, but Isamu immediately noticed a few subtle changes that only grew more noticeable as they stacked upon each other. The black and red leather coat he wore was as eye-catching as ever, but now looked more bulky, most likely from all the sewn-in armor his quartermaster reported the kid getting done. There was a very thin, near-imperceptible bulge he could see on the tall cyborg's back that left him briefly confused, but he quickly hand-waved it away in his mind. The kid made no secret he didn't truly care about how inhuman he looked, so it was most likely some kind of cyberware experiment he was in the middle of that Isamu had no intention of broaching. He liked intensity, and doubly so when it came to cutting people up. But the way those golden eyes lit up when the kid spoke about cyberware made even him pause. At least he wore actual boots for once. Isamu knew there wasn't any real difference there, but it was the principle of the matter. All of these minor changes almost made him miss the most obvious of them all, as he noticed that his guest was not as heavily armed as usual, having only brought his sword and sidearm with him. His excitement surged at the many implications that carried, but he kept a lid on it for now. He did so enjoy the little game he and the cyborg shared. Whoa! A gasp of childlike wonder drew him from his thoughts, and he was treated with the delightful sight of his son looking up at the cyborg with wide eyes. "Are you our robot, mister?" Mike's entire body twitched, but he still answered, "Afraid not, kid." Jin tilted his head innocently, "That's weird," and looked up to Isamu. "Didn't you say too much chrome made you go stupid?" "Guess I just got that many extra brain cells to burn, kid." Michael shrugged without skipping a beat. Jin turned back to the cyborg, eyes narrowed in childish suspicion. But before he could say something, Akari placed a hand on his head, completely ignoring his immediate pout. "Don't be rude to your father's guest, Jin." She quickly looked back up and slightly bowed her head. "Welcome, Mago-san. Isamu has told me a lot about you." The Borg's posture shifted to a slightly more awkward one. "Most of it exaggerated, no doubt, miss." "Ah, how forgetful of me." Isamu chose this moment to cut back in, "These are my wife Akari and my son Jin." Michael completely stilled for a brief instant, but it passed so quickly most would not have noticed. Isamu naturally did. "I see," he said before slowly bowing back. "A pleasure to meet you as well, Miss Akari. And you, Jin." Little Jin raised his nose in acknowledgement and huffed, to which Akari let out a slight laugh before turning serious and once more bowing to the cyborg. "Thank you for your help. My husband's health has been a great source of worry for all of us." Once more, Isamu was treated to the sight of the cyborg growing incredibly awkward, as he was left completely flat-footed by the sheer sincerity of his wife. I just did what I was paid for?" Akari's eyes instantly narrowed, the underlying threat clear. He needlessly cleared his throat and looked away. "I am very happy to have helped," he quickly corrected, "is what I meant to say." "Good," Akari chirped, her previously calm demeanor returning in a flash. "Well, I am sure you boys have a lot to discuss. We will leave you to it." "But Moom," Jin whined, "I want to look at the cool cyborg." "Later, Jin," Akari patiently shooed him on. "Michael Magos Sobronov." My eyes trailed after the mother and son pair as they left the dojo-like room. Doing my best to ignore the sheer contentedness and satisfaction the Tiger Claw boss was radiating as he too watched them leave. I had been confused when he invited me to the third uppermost floor about an hour earlier, having gotten used to our meetings happening in the same high-class nightclub as always. Was this another hidden message? Or was the man just that uncaring about subtlety? Honestly, I probably should have reassembled my weapons just in case, but I didn't want to be late by that much. "Took your time getting here, hmm?" As if reading my mind, Jugo spoke up. "I was busy," I shrugged, "and you weren't supposed to be back yet." Nagakawa-sama decided otherwise. He shrugged the implied question off and quirked an eyebrow while looking just under my eyes, experimenting with whatever thing is stuck to your back. My own eye twitched. Who knows? Naturally, the man just smirked at that. But something had been bothering me ever since he introduced his family, and I couldn't help myself any longer. This is not an implied threat of any kind. I preempted, but is it really that smart of you to bring your family here? I was acutely aware of the 4 bodyguards currently trying to glare holes into me. To show them to you, you mean? Jugo furrowed his brows, voice perfectly neutral. Briefly considering, I shrugged. No and yes. H11 wasn't in the heart of Tiger Claw territory after all. He failed to contain a light huff of amusement at that. You are way too paranoid, kid. Almost automatically, I responded with, is it really paranoia? If they are really out to get you, right? He finished, only the slightest tint of mockery to his tone. No, it isn't. He shook his head and approached a nearby wall, specifically a stand holding a number of practice katanas. But, he went on, what is the point of living your life if you are too afraid to actually live it? His retort was delivered in such a bland tone it almost went over my head for a brief instant. But then the question actually landed, and it left me feeling, I was honestly unsure. What was the point of being a captain in the Tiger Claws if he couldn't enjoy rising his family? Why fight at all if all you did after was fear the next battle? Only the high auto-reflex response I programmed into my operating system saved me from getting smacked in the face as the smug Jugo tossed me a practice sword, my hand clutching the metal handle so hard it creaked. Get your head out of the clouds, kid, Jugo chuckled. Time to make sure you aren't an embarrassment to that sword. You are the one who forced it on me, Gonk, I muttered, even as I took my stance. Jugo's eye twitched in disgust at what he saw, but he still kept talking. So you are going to be returning it then? Fuck off. He grinned upper guard and lunged. To think my own protege would be such a disappointment, Jugo bemoaned far too dramatically as the 2 of us were sat on a grand garden balcony facing the center of Night City. For shame. Oh fuck right off, you damn weeb, I groaned. I can punch your head off and you know it. He just shook his head in full sadness. Excuses will not save you from your lack of dedication to the blade. I just grumbled into my beer, unwilling to give him any more satisfaction. Jokes aside, Jugo spoke up after a bit. You made good progress for an amateur, but it is clear you are simply copying what you saw elsewhere. Is that really so much of a problem? I asked. Not really. He shrugged, though there was a slight bit of reluctance in his tone. We all start that way, more or less, and with your hardware it is perfectly serviceable. But I am pretty much a complete noob using a scalpel as a hammer, I finished for him. Ha! He barked out a laugh, couldn't have put it better myself. Correct, I drawled sarcastically before considering the issue. So what? I should just keep at it. You could, Jugo hummed. But that will take time. My recommendation is just visit the dojo when some of my boys are training. I'll tell the old man responsible for them to train you as he would one of our own. My eyes narrowed, the conversation trailing off as I stared into the man's side. Why? Instead of answering, Jugo fiddled with one of his pockets for a bit and soon lit up a cigarette, taking a long drag and letting out a long exhale of smoke. You are too much of a valuable ally to pussyfoot around, Mike, he said. So what? I asked. You are looking to bribe me with lessons? The question caught him just as he was taking another drag, and his eye twitched. A bit of smoke exiting through his nose before he calmed himself. There is a reason Nagakawa-sama made me get back, and it isn't just getting annoyed at me being lazy. Many questions immediately came to mind, but I held them back. You hear about the recent clashes with Maelstrom? He asked after a moment. I did, I said with a slow nod. But I was under the impression that is just something that happens all the time when gangs are involved. Yes and no. He shook his head. We are enemies and both sides know it, but keeping the status quo is more profitable than butchering each other in droves. Unfortunately, something has recently made the Maelstrom prefer the latter. So things are going to be heating up soon? I asked. Yes, Jugo confirmed, and I can't plan ahead without knowing if I can trust one of my most powerful assets. The air around us tensed, and I was once more caught a bit flat by the admission. And feeling I couldn't come up with a proper response immediately, I retreated behind sarcasm again. "Trust?" I asked, voice flat. "In Night City?" He gave me a long look at that, ultimately settling for a simple yes. For a moment I felt confused as he said nothing else, but then almost subconsciously I began analyzing everything that was said or done since I arrived, and almost immediately my mind had painted a picture that I wasn't quite sure I wanted to believe was the truth. The man had quite literally bulldozed over any and all subtlety, shown me where his family lives, even let them meet me face to face. Which, if one were to pay even the slightest amount of attention to what I could do, meant he gave me access to their internal systems to which I could do whatever the fuck I wanted. My throat went dry despite the impossibility of it as I realized the utter madman had literally offered his family as collateral just so he could show me he could be trusted not to fuck me over if I ever decided to help him in full. I found myself staring at the Tiger Claw captain for a good minute before finally looking away from those far too intense eyes. "You are fucking insane, I hope you know that." But he just kept staring at me with that same determined intensity. I wasn't sure how long passed in silence, but ultimately it was I who broke first. "Fine." I bit out, the sheer absurdity of the situation still making me want to knock myself the hell out. "You can trust me not to stab you in the back." "For now." "Good." Jugo nodded, and then promptly downed half a bottle of sake, smacking the thing on the table so hard it nearly shattered. "So," I began as the madman's breathing finally calmed, pointedly not commenting on it whatsoever. "What is going on?" Jugo's answer was as immediate as it was blunt. "Mine and Shobo's constant squabbling has drawn Maelstrom's attention. The fact the tigers of Little China and Kabuki aren't united has weakened our position enough that the fucking death cult thinks they have a chance against us." "And do they?" I couldn't help but ask. "Maybe." Jugo grunted. "We don't have all the information, but they did a big recruitment drive recently, and that spooked Nagakawa-sama into telling Shobo and I to stop our shit and prepare for battle." "And by recruitment drive you mean—" "They grabbed a bunch of kids off the streets and shoved cyberware in them, yes." He confirmed as if discussing the weather. "I was planning on dealing with Shobo permanently, but the bastard gets to live for now." "That going to be a problem?" "I can be patient." I shrugged. Sure, the other tiger boss was a disgusting excuse for a human being, but I only really wanted him for his connection with Werner. A temporary alliance would actually give me a chance to tap into his secrets that much easier. "Good." Jugo didn't sound particularly relieved. "I'll plan for the Strommer's advance with my lieutenants, but that shouldn't concern you unless they really fuck us up." Seeing me not interrupting him, he went on, "What I need from you is your other service." It didn't take me more than a few seconds to catch on to what he was getting at. "You need a ripper?" "That would be the worst-case scenario. Our rank and file should be enough." He shook his head. "No, what I need from you is to accept a number of cyberware commissions I will be offering as favors to buy myself even more allies." He raised a hand before I could speak up. "Paid in full and without my finder's fee, of course." "Acceptable." I nodded, making sure to keep the giddiness from my voice. "Free advertisement? Sign me the fuck up." "And make sure they don't hack our asses, of course," he added almost offhandedly. My eye twitched, but I still nodded. "Goes without saying." "Right," he muttered to himself. "Hopefully that will be all, but make sure to be ready for a fight, just in case." "So long as you can wait a few days," I said after a moment. "There is some biz I need to deal with." He didn't seem even slightly surprised by that admission. "The big bad afterlife merc has a gig, I see." Yes, yes, big bad Tiger Claw is observant." I drawled. "You do realize it stopped being shocking after the last 3 times, right?" "Ah, don't be like that." He chuckled and got up as I did. "An old man like me needs to get his fun somewhere." "You are like 35 tops," I couldn't help but point out. "Practically ancient for the profession." He laughed. "Now go get them, Tiger," and smacked my back. Part of me was tempted to smack him back for the horrible pun, but the wince he had to hide as he hit one of my mechadendrite pincers was more than enough to soothe my soul. "Keep the dad jokes to your son, Jugo," I said as I left for the exit. "You know what?" He chuckled. "I think I will. Thank you for your sacrifice, kid." One day later, I found myself back in my workshop, my reassembled crusher laid out before me, freshly polished with a slight red tint, now tastefully added to enhance its intimidation factor. I lifted the weapon and, without even looking, inserted an enlarged magazine with my mechadendrite, pulling the receiver back at the same moment with a satisfying shing. Content with the fluidity of the move, I stood up and brought the gun to the rest of my armory, mentally checking all the other weapons as I did before allowing a slight smile to spread on my face. I was ready. 37, Chapter 37, The Militech Job. Breathe in, breathe out. The crisp morning air helped my racing thoughts settle ever so slowly, the excitement and trepidation for what was to come eventually falling behind a focused calm. I was prepared for this. I was ready. I would win. My eyes snapped open as my anonymous payment was processed and the doors of the renter garage shut closed, my third escape route properly secured and ready to be used at a moment's notice. I allowed myself one final moment of doubt before squashing it and leaving the eerily silent nook of the glen, sliding into a nearby alleyway that was my team's meeting point. Or I would have if my detection systems didn't immediately start blaring warnings into my head, and I turned utterly still. As a mere half step in front of me, I could just barely see a tiny string of metal stretched out exactly where my throat would have been. Tish! The familiar voice of my female teammate came from just behind a nearby dumpster, so much for the elite netrunner. She never did let that one go. I grumbled to myself before simply deciding to shut her up in the most poignant way possible. I will give credit where it is due. Her ice lasted impressively long against my Cyberdeck's processing power, but the outcome was inevitable as my softreset.exe program slipped past her protections in less than a second, and her monowire retracted into her left arm, the limb going momentarily limp before reactivating fully. Of course, what I expected to be a perfectly logical way to prove I was in fact exactly what I claimed seemed to only piss her off further. What the fuck? Now. Thankfully, that was the exact moment the third and final member of the team decided to join us, sliding out of another alleyway dressed in was that Militech storage worker uniform? How about we keep that delightful energy for the corpo soldiers, The old man went on without skipping a beat. Kimigawa's bafflement won over her annoyance. Why are you dressed like that? Sharp grinned. Because, my dear, Lady Fortune was on my side last night. He rubbed his hands together. See, I was just spending my night like I always do. In the old folks' home? The Asian woman asked dryly. He pretended like she said nothing, and met a very eager fellow. We played a few games, had a few drinks, and one thing led to another. He shrugged his shoulders helplessly, and he decided to let me work his shift for him. And this shift? I worked my jaw slightly in disbelief. Does it also just so happen to be in Complex N16? Odd how these things line up, no? James Sharp smirks and then turns without a word, walking back the same way he came and expecting us to follow. Kimigawa and I share a quick look. She clicks her tongue and looks away, but despite that we both follow after the old man. Still, something didn't quite add up. I lengthened my stride and a few seconds later I was walking side by side with Sharp. Did it not occur to you to inform us of this change in plans earlier? His ensuing exhale came suspiciously close to a snort. My shoemaker wasn't easy to convince to do the rush job, so I didn't want to raise your hopes. He shrugged without a care and turned to me with a slight wink. Besides, our earlier plan was to fully hack our way to the same destination, and I prefer something more reliable to that. Not feeling particularly insulted by his lack of belief in my ability, I simply offered a nod in agreement. Human error is much more reliable to that of the machine. For whatever reason, that truth made the man finally lose a bit of composure and bark out a laugh. Minutes later, we found ourselves standing in front of a sturdy-looking orange forklift, a large metal box laid out before it, a box that seemed to have been lined against scanners. So this is your master plan? Kimigawa asked, still suspiciously rubbing the neuroport at the side of her neck that now held my net hobbler chip. Pretend we are corpo rats going to work? She flashed me a sideways glance. Really? Oh no, of course not. Sharp immediately shook his head and grinned. I will be pretending to be a worker, while you, he pointed at her and then at me, will be getting into the box. What? Get in the box, Yumiko. The supremely irritated Asian woman huddled against the side of the box-filled box, glaring at our ride and then at me. Am I the only one who understands how ridiculous this is? She hiss-whispered at me, to which I just kept playing with my EMP grenade, tossing it up and down and shrugged. The plan seems perfectly reasonable to me. Of course it does, she sighed. James sharp, schooling his features into the tired, soulless gaze of an exhausted corpo worker, the old mercenary drove his forklift towards the gate of the walled Militech complex. He was noticed almost immediately by the guards, and judging by their postures, he was sure they carried those same looks under their visored masks. ID. The one standing next to the entrance ramp droned. Here you go, James droned back, offering the plastic card. Know if the coffee machine is still fucked? The guard grunted in annoyance. Not until Murdoch gets off his ass. And until someone greases his gear, that ain't happening. James grumbled, fucking asshole. Ain't that God's honest truth? The guard passed the card through a reader, and a moment later it beeped positive. Everything is in order. You can go. Now hold on there a second. A distinctly non-dead voice cut him off, one that carried a distinctly non-Night City accent. Southern USA? The British man pondered briefly. James' eyes were drawn to another approaching guard, one that seemed to lack the subtle slouch of the others. In fact, he seemed almost eager, James cursed in his mind in realization. Just what he needed. A corpo rat looking to impress. I haven't seen you here before, the guard said, his suspicious look evident despite his blackened visor. Fuck's sake, Jim. The first guard grumbled so quietly James nearly missed it, before turning to the other one with pure irritation in his posture. You can't know every single forklift operator in the complex. We have over 300 employed. I don't know, Greg. The second guard spoke to the first with a far too familiar tone, judging by the other man's by now radiating annoyance. He seems suspicious to me. Greg took a deep breath. But that was all Jim needed to take as confirmation, and he slowly walked over to the front of the forklift. Greg gave James an apologetic look, but shrugged and shook his head. His dad got into the middle ranks. Best not piss him off. James pretended to commiserate, but the hand not facing either of the guards was already thumbing the silenced Lexington at his hip. Jim wasted no time in opening the metal box, revealing rows upon rows of boxes inside. What are you bringing in? He asked. Fresh uniforms, James droned. Mm-hmm. Jim hummed, and then the eyes hidden behind his visor flashed blue. James' breath caught as he realized the Nepo hire had some actual equipment, and he prepared to call the gig off. But much to his relief and bafflement, a few seconds of staring later, the guard grunted in annoyance and shut the box closed. They are clean. Nosy little fucker, Greg muttered and waved James on. Get going before he gets any more ideas. James plastered fake annoyance onto his face and gave Greg a slow nod of thanks before firing up his engine and driving on exactly as quickly as a bored worker with too much experience would. He felt Jim's glare on his back and wondered, would the kid live long enough to tell the others, I told you so? Michael Magos Sobronov. The forklift stopped moving some 5 minutes later, and another passed before we heard the familiar rustling of boxes, and the path for our exit was cleared. Yumiko, whom I realized halfway through the ride was very mildly claustrophobic, quickly leapt out of the box, while I followed her more sedately. Potentially a mistake, as I caught her glaring daggers into a rather amused-looking James, though the moment his eyes landed on me, his look turned somewhat dour. How were you not detected? I hacked his optics. I answered simply, still a bit annoyed that we were nearly discovered on accident. They shouldn't notice a thing. As I talked, I gave the area a quick look over and held back a sigh of relief at finding no cameras facing us. Good, he nodded. I got us to a quiet corner of the construction area. There are some guards around, but so long as we don't draw too much attention, we should be able to approach the maintenance tunnel without raising an alarm. Say what you will about the old man, but he really knew what he was doing. I couldn't help but rise my estimation of him. The N16 complex was made up of a surface building that served mostly as an office space for Militech's NC operations, while the storage space below was said to mostly contain valuable components, either meant for further production or direct sales in Night City. The complex was thus not particularly important in the grand scheme of things, but it was still heavily guarded by Militech, as it was one of the few spaces they could use to project their power in the Free City after their failure to conquer it 5 years back. A fact that made it the perfect spot to keep some sensitive tech while it was waiting transportation without drawing the eyes of the other megacorps. Naturally, they appear to have failed in that task, and something told me it was exactly one of their rivals that was sponsoring our current excursion into their vaults. But that was besides the point at the moment, because the source of the money ultimately did not matter, only the completion of the job. And that was made much easier by the fact some kind of hardware accident happened in the complex a month back, with something blowing up in the outer storage yards that damaged the foundations enough to warrant extensive repairs. Repairs that, should we be able to reach the area without detection, would allow us to skip the first 2 levels of the complex with nothing but good timing and a bit of stealth. And Sharp just got us in while drawing the barest amount of attention possible. The 3 of us wasted no time as the outlines of the Militech guards appeared in our optics. The local net felt a lot more watched than usual, which was to be perfectly expected, and while I had no doubts it would have ripped apart a less sophisticated ping, I was confident my own scan drew no attention whatsoever. We stepped out of the cover of our trusty forklift and timing our passage perfectly, using the information my hacking provided to avoid detection as we stalked deeper into the construction area. The place was pretty crowded, even this early in the morning, but thankfully all of us were equipped with some mobility enhancements, and with some quick scurrying and scaling, we were able to avoid the cameras. No point in hacking them if we could just pass them by after all. Our good fortune did not end there either, as the vast majority of the workers, and even some of the guards, were gathered around a heather, sharing drinks and grumbling to each other before they surrendered to their 12 hours of daily drudgery, which gave us the perfect opportunity to simply slip through, leaving not a shade out of place. The maintenance tunnel entrance leading to level 3 was pretty easy to find after that, what with all the warning and keep-out signs that littered its surroundings, and the 2 obviously cyberized guards standing to both sides of it, a camera slowly scanning the area just above them. "Damn," James cursed to himself, "we need to get them out of the way." Kimigawa whispered, looking up at me a moment later, "Can you take care of the camera?" Frowning momentarily, I nodded. "I can place it in a loop." "Good." She nodded. "Be ready to hide the bodies." And waiting for neither myself nor James to answer, I saw her optical camo implant activate, and she disappeared from sight almost completely, save for a slight distorted outline invisible to the naked eye. Most of my attention immediately turned to the local net, and I was almost relieved as I felt a dweller's attention passing me by instead of a corporate AI. Fooling a human, no matter how enhanced, would always be infinitely easier. The camera began looping moments later, as if it had been purpose-made to do just that. Satisfied, I sent Kimigawa the signal. Some instinct must have warned the guards because the 2 of them suddenly tensed. But it was too little too late, as their necks exploded in blood and static, their heads flying off into the air as their bodies fell like puppets with their strings cut. Kimigawa reappeared, a small satisfied smirk on her face as she retracted her monowire. Sharp and I wasted no time as we rushed out of cover, dragging the 2 corpses away to a nearby nook hidden between stacks of cement bags. "Did you really have to spray them all over the place?" Sharp commented as we approached the now cleared entrance. "Well, as clear as a recently scrubbed butcher's shop, I supposed." She frowned, but then looked at the large mess of blood she had left behind and visibly held back a wince. "Shit," she cursed. "We need to get moving, only a matter of time before someone notices." "Quite," Sharp agreed dryly. "Mr. Magos, if you would." The way forward opened with a satisfying hiss. The maintenance tunnel did not go on for long, and soon enough we entered the 3rd level of the complex, exiting into what looked like some kind of tool storage area, one that quickly cleared of guards as the 2 unfortunates left to keep watch quickly found their cyberware dying on them, an act that was swiftly followed by rapid and deadly stabbing by Kimigawa. The self-professed combat assassin fell fully into her element as we descended into the narrow corridors of the compound, so much so I stopped bothering with my constant pinging and allowed myself to focus fully on the defenses. It was only a matter of time before the dweller got suspicious, and I couldn't have that happening before we were ready to bolt. so I started preparing, even if it cost us some speed. The other two did not complain and adapted appropriately, their assault on any unsuspecting guard turning more methodical at the cost of speed as they purposefully evaded sensors I would in turn not need to disable and hid the bodies where they could. The schematics Nix provided us steered us true, and soon we found the stairwell leading to the lower floors, the turrets and cameras overlooking the descent quickly and quietly, shutting down as I turned my attention to them. But with each hack, I could feel I was generating just a bit more noise than before. "We need to slow down," I warned as we approached the 5th level, the heat building in the back of my head, feeling more pronounced by the minute. "I am making too much noise." Kimigawa looked like she wanted to take a shot at my net-running skills again, but held herself back. Sharp frowned. "Any way to make it easier on you?" he asked. "We cannot spend too much time dawdling before we are forced to blow our cover." "I'm preparing for exactly that moment," I muttered absently, waving him off, while most of my mind remained focused on the sea of ones and zeros. "We need to reach this floor's mainframe," I said after a moment. "I should be able to clear the rest of the way much more easily with direct access." Part of me revolted at the idea of putting more weight on the two of them and thus having to rely on them, but I quickly squashed it like the irrational bug it was. "Consider it done," Sharp said. Kimigawa sharply exhaled. "Watch and learn." The two of them took the lead once again, Sharp stepping out of the cover of the stairwell with his usual confidence, while Kimigawa turned invisible again. The guards took a moment to react to the presence of a worker in the lower levels, and that moment cost them as Sharp finally used his own hacking abilities to hit all four of them with an optics reset, putting 2 bullets down in 2 heads each, while the other pair found themselves heads shorter to the now visible Kimigawa. Level 5 was almost eerily silent as we passed the entrance. No others remained in the large storage area save for a maintenance worker who was swiftly knocked out by Sharp's pistol whip. "We should probably kill him just in case," Kimigawa pointed out, but I was too busy staring at what was kept in storage to answer. "No," Sharp immediately shook his head. "It is unnecessary." Kimigawa frowned. "What caught your eye, Mr. Margos?" The old man promptly ignored her as he saw me staring at the sole stack of assembled robots. The place was filled to the brim with sophisticated components and parts for what was definitely droid construction, but one pallet seemed to be covered by the full and functional product, and I couldn't help but thank God that that was the case, because I was staring directly into a pile of WASP suicide drones, a source of much PTSD in the reunification war. The moment I shared this information, both Sharp and Kimigawa hissed and took steps back away from the little horror shows. Briefly, I considered placing an EMP grenade with a manual trigger in the pile, but I quickly got a much better idea. The mainframe was nothing more than a small server stack in one of the corners of the room, and after scanning it for any immediate defenses, I used my personal link cable to connect to the local net physically, and immediately got to work. The direct connection in combination with my cyberdeck allowed me much finer control over what I was doing, as I could bypass multiple firewalls and watch protocols without even needing to try. Or more aptly, I had already passed them simply by being in the server. That poor dweller was completely blind to me now. Hacks and demons left me in the dozens, and before 2 minutes were passed, I disconnected from the mainframe. "We are ready." Kimigawa was already marching back to the stairwell. Sharp gave the droids one final suspicious look, then shared one with me and shook his head while chuckling darkly. It felt almost like a blink to my focused mind when we reached the 6th level. Compared to the ones above it, it was relatively tiny, and while its admittedly impressive surveillance suite and the accompanying dozen turrets would have posed a grand challenge if I had not already taken them all over, all that was left were the hapless guards standing or sat around on storage boxes, completely relaxed and assured they would not be surprised in the deepest parts of the complex. We were quick to dissuade them of that foolishness. Sharp and Kimigawa wasted no time in rushing inside, the latter ripping Militech soldiers apart with her monowire before they could even register her presence, while the former calmly shot 3 in the head with his auto pistol. Double tap as a matter of course. I myself was left with only one rat to deal with, as the irritant decided to waste his last breaths on trying to call for reinforcements. The look of terror I saw through his cracked visor almost made me sorry for shutting off his lungs. Almost. And just like that, we were standing in front of a stack of 10 heavy metal suitcases, a scan quickly confirming they all held the Trojan Mark IV droid we were here for. I pointedly ignored the deactivated Arasaka sea mine standing in the other corner. Eagerly, Sharp reached for the drone box nearest to him, only to have his grubby, wrinkled hand stopped in its tracks by the pincers of my mechadendrite. The two mercenaries stilled as they saw my hidden appendage sticking out from my back through a split opening in my coat previously held together by lines of highly magnetized metal. Flashes of doubt passed in their eyes, and it didn't take me long to realize how unfortunate my move looked. Boxes are rigged to blast the alarm the moment we so much as touch them, I explained quickly, letting his arm go. Whoever set them up knew what they were doing. It would take me at least 5 minutes to disable the protections. Of course. The old man sighed. Things were starting to feel too easy. Afraid to do some actual work, Sharp? Kimigawa rolled her eyes. My dear, you wound me. The man smirked and then looked at me. Think it is worth risking the extra time? With the bloodbath we left behind us? I asked rhetorically. Hell no. Well then, it seems our next move is rather simple, isn't it? He smiled. On your mark. Sharing a look with Kimigawa and getting her agreement, I began counting down with the fingers of my right hand, while my mind was once more almost fully on the net. The moment I folded my thumb, I pressed a mental switch, and the dozens upon dozens of demons I had uploaded directly into the dweller's implants activated, setting the poor gonk on fire exactly as Sharp picked up the first suitcase and a deafening alarm started blaring throughout Complex N16. My hands were getting rather itchy. I thought as I reached for my trusty crusher and prepared to turn the death trap that was this building against its owners. Author's notes, someone who works with forging false identities and documents, etc. 38, Chapter 38, The Militech Job, Part 2. Shit. Kimigawa cursed as she picked up one of the suitcases. This thing is heavier than I expected. She easily picked it up with her implants anyway, but it still visibly unbalanced her. The relatively small case was deceptively weighty. Ignoring the urging of the complex's intruder alarm, I quickly scanned the room and made a decision. Give me a second. The two of them frowned at the delay, but still did as I asked as I began scrounging through the dead Militech soldiers, ripping their uniforms apart as quickly as I could and moving on to my allies before they could so much as protest. 2 precious minutes flashed by as I did my work, and all 3 of us had the heavy boxes tied to our backs. Sharp gave me a crisp nod and turned to Kimigawa. Can you fight like that? The Asian woman's face twitched in annoyance as she moved her shoulders about experimentally, but she forced it cool. I'll manage. Good, I cut in, even as I uploaded a ping onto the local net. We need to get moving yesterday. In silent agreement, I took point, crusher in hand and grenades primed for use. The moment we stepped out of the storage room, I immediately threw a frag down the hallway leading to the stairwell. The Corpo squad rushing downstairs, barely having the time to react before it detonated, blowing the legs off of one man and stunning the rest. Kimigawa. A single clipped word, and she was already rushing the group to finish them off, spraying a salvo of smart SMG bullets that seemed to hone in on the soldiers' weak points as she moved into melee range. But I couldn't admire her artistry with the monowire for more than a glance, as Sharp and I turned in the other direction just as the nearby elevator opened up to reveal 8 more heavily armored Corpo grunts. 8 Corpo grunts currently stuffed like synth sardine in a can. My crusher barked out its heavy shells, barely twitching in my hands and ragdolling the fuckers unlucky enough to be first in line and painting the pristine chrome walls of the lift red with blood and viscera. Every single one of them had subdermals and body armor, but they'd need something much, much heavier to resist a modified shotgun firing armor-piercing rounds at close range. One survived as my clip clicked empty, but was quickly rewarded for his tenacity with a perfectly placed 3-shot burst to the eyes by Sharp and his assault rifle, the old man aiming at the corpse for a second longer before moving on. Behind us, Kimigawa finally finished her impromptu brawl with one burly unit of a Corpo by shoving her SMG up his neck and unloading, effectively decapitating the man and painting herself red. We wasted no time gawking and quickly rushed up the stairs, not unaware of the squad of corpos above us, currently fortifying the doors as their leader barked orders and tried his best to hide his stimulant-enhanced panic. Fuckers couldn't even give their NCOs the good shit. And not that it would have helped, I thought gleefully as I easily slipped my way back into the connection I maintained with the turret. They were still oh so very certain was theirs. Their field netrunner, just a man with a bunch of pre-installed quick hacks really, had just enough time to scream before his brain was overloaded, and the twin-linked heavy machine gun turret turned on the Militech grunts, sawing 5 of them in half before its slow turning speed allowed the officer who was standing back to disable it by unloading the entire magazine of his Mark IV AR. Knowing the information was compromised, I immediately pushed my cyberdeck harder, uploading new instructions to all of the rest of the turrets and turning the rest of the complex into an even bigger bloodbath. But the rat seemed to have some backbone in him at least. The bogey netrunner has the is as far as he got with shouting into his communicator before I blew his head open. Brave man. Sharp frowned. He knew he wouldn't have the time to reload. Fool should have run. Kimigawa scoffed. The old man did not stop moving behind me. Perhaps. I felt the other staircase turrets above us suddenly stop belching their heavy munitions as their power was cut directly at the source and immediately focused on what the corpos were doing. Into the hallway now, I barked as I peeked through an upstairs camera and saw what was definitely a demolitions team rushing towards the supporting pillar of the staircase, 1 level above us. But the rats were quick with their hands, and I was forced to yank Kimigawa by the scruff of her jacket as I blurred into the main space of level 5. Almost absently, I noticed Sharp grunting in pain as his shoulder twitched with blood and static, but I was not given the time to scan him as the stairwell behind us detonated, burying our exit route completely and washing the whole area in concrete dust. And things did not stop there, as the corpo grunts waiting inside level 5 blindly unloaded on us, forcing Sharp to roll to the side and peppering me with stray shots here and there. Time seemed to almost slow down as I analyzed the situation. So far I had taken no damage, but I knew that their weapons were more than good enough to damage me if they got a lucky shot, so staying still and engaging in a prolonged firefight would be idiotic at best. Knowing that was the case, the only choice remaining was to flip the board whole. I dropped Kimigawa, primed my cyberlegs, and charged. My reinforced joints launched me into a blur as I practically reappeared between the rattled corpo soldiers, the bark of my crusher cutting them down before they even realized what was happening. Close quarters did not give them the chance to focus their fire as I kept myself moving, and I emptied my entire magazine before grabbing my copperhead and continuing to do the same, the incendiary rounds setting those unfortunate enough to survive me on fire from within, as their screams filled the room. All the while I kept my deck focused on my surroundings, and I ended my assault by emptying the last of my incendiaries into the chest of a particularly small grunt. All the while I pretended not to notice the grunt behind me getting off the ground, and what was left of the corpse of one of his comrades, and prime a grenade with terrified hatred in his eyes. The gonk may have even succeeded had I not noticed him, but just as he prepared to suicide, rush me with what was a Gen 2 Sandavistan at best, my hidden mechadendrite lashed out with all the speed of a bullet, puncturing his throat and spine and dangling him up like some kind of macabre puppet. The grenade detonated uselessly behind me, too far to do anything but scrape the paint off my coat. The sight of the now legless body dangling off of an inhuman limb, though. Now that did some real damage. The few remaining highly trained, heavily equipped, and most likely minorly psycho-indoctrinated foot soldiers saw what happened and hesitated. And in combat, hesitation was death. A blink, and half of the remaining grunts were blown up by a PLS grenade launch, the others falling like weeds to disciplined AR fire as my allies rejoined the fight. The final 2 rounded on the new arrivals in their panic and failed to notice me taking my stance again. An act that cost them their lives as I once more launched myself forward, my thermal blade slicing through the first completely and ending up stuck somewhere in the middle of the second. The man stared at me through his visor with optics filled with terror, before gurgling something and falling limp. Still focusing on the battlefield, I redirected my scan to Sharp and held back a relieved sigh as I noticed he was only minorly damaged. "Surrender now, you merc fucks," a voice barked out from within the storage rooms. "I have an entire swarm of wasps with me, and I am not afraid to use it." Utterly unsurprised, I couldn't help but quip, "Except if you were so confident, you would have set them on us already." To myself, I will give the gonk credit where it was due. Even while distracting us, he was trying and utterly failing to breach the chip on Kimigawa's neck, and wasn't stupid enough to try the same on an FBC. "Stop bluffing, kid." Sharp seemed to share my thinking. "How about you get out here and I shoot you just enough not to flatline you? Should let your bosses leave you with your brain if you are lucky." "Ha!" The by now shivering netrunner barked out a confident laugh. "Did you not hear what I said? I will swarm you in fucking—" That was as far as he got before his words were replaced with screams and repeated panicked shouts of, "No, no, no, no." Before that too was gone, and all that remained was blades on flesh and the crunching of bones. Sharp's face turned even paler than usual, his optics dilating slightly at a sound before he centered himself. "The fuck?" Kimigawa hissed barely audibly. Her answer came a moment later as a tiny 10-razor-limbed box of death and pain marched out of the storage room covered in the remains of the netrunner, quickly followed by another 20 of its kind. Kimigawa quickly joined Sharp in his paleness. "They are mine now." I said, "Let's move." And while the two looked suitably impressed, they were more than happy to let me take point again and kept their distance from my horde of drones. Luckily, even if unsurprisingly, the storage space that was the Militech complex was not built with only a single utility stairwell as its access point, and two more were left for us to use without taking the elevator into account. Consulting Nix's schematics as I walked, I quickly decided on the best approach route and pivoted away from my initial path without saying a thing. The net was far more efficient to share plans as I uploaded the route directly into my allies' agents. Sharp grunted in affirmative, and our march turned into a jog, and then a run as I herded the murder drones in front of me. The death machines swarmed up the sides of the staircase before us, and I could almost see the Militech grunts above widening their eyes in realization before the screams began anew. The three of us were not slow behind them, myself leading the charge again with my shotgun and gunning down those few grunts trying to save their comrades from a gruesome death. It seemed I still had much to learn of just how low a corporate rat was willing to sink, however, as I could just barely hear their NCO barking out orders from within, my optics widening in half bafflement, half panic, as I immediately pushed that information onto my allies. The corpo officer, faced with an unwinnable situation, made the only correct decision he could. Correct, yet utterly vile. I had no time to think, only act, and I threw myself back with all the force my legs provided. Just as the grenades started flying, the corpos that were first in line were taken apart by a salvo of explosions, many of my drones following them in their flat line, as the poor fuckers were not even given a moment to realize the sheer betrayal that had just happened. I grunted as I pulled myself out of the indent I made in the concrete wall and failed to keep the snarl from my face. We were enemies, true, and none of us had our souls clear of filth, but there were still things that just weren't done, and this was one of them. Uncaring for the logistics of it, I connected to all of my drones and ordered them forward, making sure to input a command to really make the fucker regret his life choices. There were no grunts to finish off as we got up to level 4, only a pile of meat. Sharp gave the corpses, and more importantly the drones, a quick head count before looking at me seriously. "This won't work," he said. "They are surely getting their heavy weapons ready upstairs, and the drones won't cut it." "Fucking backstabbing corpo rats," I cursed. "We can't just keep charging in and hoping for the best." Even now I could feel my nanites repairing the finger joints of my right hand. That explosion was anything but harmless. "Then misdirect them, you gonk," Kimigawa finally cut in. "Throw the bots at the fuckers waiting for us upstairs and use the distraction to get up through the elevator." Sharp and I paused, sharing a quick sideways glance. "Huh? Huh?" Kimigawa repeated irritably, "Get to it already." Holding back a retort, I did as she said and immediately began uploading demons on the local net again. The ones I had spread out before were strong, but even if not particularly competent. The dollar store netrunners that were present in nearly every Militech squad were numerous and were starting to wear them down. If they got the chance to interfere with us directly, this battle would turn much more difficult very quickly. I ignored the light hissing in the back of my throat as the heat from my cyberdeck began transferring. Synchronically, what remained of my horde of drones began marching up the staircase, even if I was hesitant to part with all of them. Keeping one for study would have been great, but survival was what mattered now. My scans would have to do. Squashing my irritation, I forced the locks of the elevator open just as the box finally descended, its movements masked completely by my thorough infestation of the local net. "Get in," I said, and the two quickly followed, the doors shutting closed behind them as shitty elevator music started playing. "Seriously?" Kimigawa deadpanned. "Yeah, seriously," I said dryly, noticing her hidden amusement and Sharp's not-so-hidden chuckle. Most of my focus was currently stuck to the cameras spread about the complex, though, giving me the perfect view of the corpos waiting for us getting rapidly butchered by my increasingly suicidal drones. Their commander was not nearly as ruthless as the one who unwittingly stopped us from just cutting through the bulk of their forces, and for his lack of cruelty, he was forced to watch as his troops were turned inside out by the skittering war crimes. Not even their kills went unpunished, as the little things would throw themselves on the closest enemy the moment they detected critical damage and detonate themselves in a considerable explosion. They would all be dead soon, but the point was not in killing them. Oh no, already the grunts above them were rushing downstairs as their commander finally got a report on rogue wasps and promptly decided containing them was a priority to exhausting a trio of mercs hiding behind the bots they could just swarm with soldiers later. Or so I guessed was their thought process. The most important part of the equation was the fact the already drained garrison of the complex was now fully rushing downstairs. While the three of us were calmly ascending to the top, not an obstacle in sight. I couldn't help but share the series of recordings with the others. "Oh God," Kimigawa snorted before rising her nose unconsciously. "See, I told you my plan was the best." "Good on you, kid." Sharp ruffled her hair, for which he nearly got shanked. I almost allowed myself to relax, but quickly caught myself as I was reminded of what happened the last time I was overconfident, and so I focused back on the fight. "The moment we get out, you two rush to the sides. I'll get their attention." Sharp and Kimigawa quickly turned serious and nodded. I was the current designated walking fortress, so in absentia of a declared leader, the duo were more than happy to listen to my request. Taking an unnecessary deep breath, I hefted my crusher with my left hand and deactivated the magnetic lock of my sword with my right. Seconds passed by as we reached the ground floor, but each felt like a minute as both nervousness and excitement built in my mind. And as my tension reached its highest, the doors of the elevator split open, presenting us with the mustering rush of what remained of the Militech garrison, formed up in ranks with the highest-ranked officer present, barking out her strategy for taking us down. Her voice died in her throat as the elevator dinged. "So," I voiced as I took a step forward, something in the air stopping the grunts from reacting instantly. "How is that trauma plan?" An NCO was the quickest to react, rising his high-caliber light machine gun with his considerable cyber arms. Three things happened at the same time. Sharp rolled to the side and took cover behind a stone-potted palm tree to my left. Face set with calm calculation, Kimigawa activated her camo and disappeared to my right, and I finished lowering my crusher, blowing the NCO's head off while roaring, "Apparently it's great," and overclocking the shit out of my cyberdeck to deactivate as much cyberware as I could. In a blink, the world turned to bullets and explosions. 39. Chapter 39, The Militech Job, Part 3/Finale. Militech Commander, and her day had started out so great. She had saved up her free days and finally managed to get enough dirt on her boss to not ask any questions for a few days. She could almost smell her promotion after she dealt with Wilkins and put him in the dirt where he belonged. Still, she had to be patient. She went to work 1 hour early, as suggested by her superiors, and made sure to keep everyone on track without making them hate her guts. Idiots that only thought about productivity in the short term learned quickly why suicide by 10 bullets to the back of the head became such a common workplace health and safety hazard in most corporations. Still, she ran a tight ship, made sure everyone did their shifts when they needed to, and made sure to silently help along the actually useful ones. It kept things smooth. It kept things quiet. Today was everything except fucking quiet. About half an hour earlier, that uppity little shit Jimothy, who in their right fucking mind names their kid Jimothy, decided to bother her again about a suspicious forklift worker, like he did every other day ever since he was shoved her way without even a by your leave. Thankfully, while the little shit was on a fast track to a promotion due to blatant nepotism, she was still above his idiot of a father, so all she had to do was let the gonk speak for a bit and then pretend to care. How in the fuck was she supposed to expect he'd be actually right for once? She was having her morning coffee when all of a sudden the alarms of the VIP storage area started blaring all over the base. A minute before she got the report of her dweller, someone whom she had been cultivating as an asset for years, being found with his head completely burned out. For once, she was thankful for her cousin's insistence she get a Kerenzikov implant when she was promoted to base commander, as it gave her the time to calm the fuck down and think. She immediately scrambled all available units and sent them to try and hem in the edge runners, as confirmed a minute later through the dying scream of one of her NCOs, and either hunt them down or at least slow them down enough for the rest to prepare. Capturing one would be ideal to salvage her career, but she knew that was a pipe dream. But fuck it, she'd take burying them if the alternative was to let them escape with the cases. Of course, things turned considerably less optimistic once she got the next round of reports. The cameras were still not working, and she wasn't stupid enough to send anyone else down through the elevators. But the emergency radio communications were still perfectly operational, and reports of repurposed wasps started coming in. She was once more thankful for her Karen, because if her command squad saw her shivering in terror, they'd be fucked. Priorities immediately redirected, she immediately marched as many soldiers as she could down what she knew to be an impending slaughterhouse, and she did it without hesitation. If those things got out, the Arasakas would pounce on their asses, and it would all be her fault. Thankfully, it seemed the mercs were using the wasps as throwaways instead of support units. Foolish, but she could see an overeager netrunner wanting to stay out of the line of fire. Less thankfully, the forces she sent downstairs were decimated, and it was now her turn to try and salvage something of this clusterfuck. She gathered the last remnants of the garrison in the reception hall. She took in a short breath and began speaking under the time dilation, each word calculated to provoke as much anger as was possible. Night City scum has invaded the base. She said calmly, clinically, 86 of your comrades at arms are already dead by their hands, just so they can get another payday. Most looked like they did not care, but she knew they were just pretending to. Grunt workers were always too emotional to truly advance in the ranks. She held down her smirk. We at Militech do not bow to the petty whims of mercenaries, and I for one do not feel like dying so some gutter runner can get his daily dose of BDs. Some chuckles, some shifting of feet. She knew not to drag it out, so she went in for the finisher. We are stronger, better armed, we have greater implants. Those mercenaries are nothing without… Ding! The entire hall turned dead silent as the elevator doors opened, and the commander grasped onto her Kerenzikov's time dilation like her life depended on it. She could do absolutely nothing as her thoughts raced out of even her ironclad control, and the fucking full-body conversion cyborg walked out of the elevator almost languidly. So, Death asked, far too many toothed grin visible under the armored biker helmet, how is that trauma plan? Almost making her miss the two others. She was finally managing to get her limbs moving, but others were quicker, and she was forced to watch as Sergeant Igor raised his LMG with a snap burst of his Sandevistan, only to have his head blown off an instant later. Apparently it's great. The fucking mercenary just had to gloat. Giving her far too slow arms all the time, they needed to line up a shot. Or so she thought as she felt a sudden buzz in her optics that made her sight glitch out. Her modified overture kicked like a tank, but just as her eyes recalibrated, she saw the cyborg moving, a light groove in his right shoulder armor. She went for another shot, but the Borg had already reached her soldiers, though not before revealing a distinctly inhuman limb from his bag that grabbed onto his grenade satchel and then threw it directly into their center mass. The explosion and trembling ground was all the cover he needed before he was among them, too close for anyone to fire freely, and with an obvious advantage in melee combat. Blood and viscera began flying from his position like a fountain. She saw some of her soldiers fall to the disciplined fire of one of the other, thankfully very human mercenaries, but she quickly left them to Smith and Martin's squads as they seemed to have them well in hand. Her implant allowed her near infinite time to think, making her reaction plan in objective time near instant. Spread out. Simmons back to the entrance, James east wing, Williams to me. The troops followed their orders immediately, but not without casualties, as against her projections, the cyborg was not stunned for even a blink by the sudden choice paralysis presented to him and immediately took after James's squad. She began giving out orders to hem him in, while making the most of the squad's sacrifice when she felt a heavy shove to her left. Slow motion gave her the perfect view as she turned to snap at whoever pushed her, only to see Marianne, her second-in-command, get whipped over the head by a blindingly fast monowire. Her almost friend's head was promptly bisected by the razor-sharp weapon, and she felt no terror or hesitation this time as she ordered her command squad to put the merc down while she focused on the real threat. Whoever that was only human. She could hear members of her squad fighting and dying to her left, but she put them out of her mind, once again preparing her overture. What she found on the other end was both as terrible as she expected and surprisingly encouraging. The Borg's gait was broken, an obvious sign of heavy shotgun fire on his left hip as she more hopped than sprinted through the combat, obviously not used to the movement even if he was adapting at rapid speeds, but she knew that this was her chance. She immediately sent the radio signal, and to her right, Sergeant Simmons brought up her heavy machine gun, the suppressive fire of her other soldiers going up in volume as a number of them threw out their grenades the moment Sergeant James threw himself at his enemy, now that his whole squad was dead. The Borg's unnatural snake-like appendage lashed out again, impaling the sergeant through the chest, and as if having eyes on the back of his head, he immediately twisted the body around himself and in the path of the fusillade to his back. James's body was torn apart in milliseconds, the heavy wave of bullets seemingly slowing the FBC down for a brief moment. Except that was the exact time the commander caught a muffled charging sound behind the noise of tearing flesh, and then what remained of James's body exploded as a railgun round burst through him and directly into Simmons' head. The sergeant and the two soldiers behind her were pulverized seemingly from nowhere, startling the troops and momentarily breaking their cohesion. And then, like something straight out of a horror XBD, the cyborg launched himself at them, sword discarded as he dual-wielded assault rifle and auto shotgun with horrific accuracy. But he wasn't undamaged. His right hand was missing two of its lower fingers, his chest armor was completely ripped to shreds, and his chrome chassis had multiple dents and even minor punctures in it, and the side of his face had a jagged groove passing through it from a HMG shell. Somehow it made his far too toothy grin even more terrifying than before. She immediately fired another round of her overture, but that same fucking glitch came to her eyes again, making her miss him completely this time. Fuck, she cursed, her calm threatening to crack. Despite the terror-inducing scene, the last mostly untouched section of her troops under Williams immediately began firing at him, stopping him from simply annihilating what was left of Simmons' squad. Or they would have if the cyborg's grin did not suddenly start steaming and damn near every single soldier stumbled on their feet or fumbled with their weapons, their shots going wild despite the threat charging straight at them. Simmons's squad could not even react as another grenade bandolier was thrown their way by the barely scratched inhuman limb, the Borg not even bothering to look their way as they all exploded. Decidedly unwilling to die, she started preparing contingencies. Things turned to an outright melee then, both her men and the cyborg becoming more sluggish with each passing second as the bogey's now empty weapons were discarded in favor of sword and fist, the chrome limbs doing just as much if not more damage than the blade. She saw one of her troopers rush the Borg from the side, shotgun pointed at the side of his head, only for the monstrosity to twitch backwards, bite his gun in half without even a blink of hesitance, and reach for his belt. The gun went off, but due to the sudden blockage, the shell exploded backwards, blinding the soldier and leaving him open to the liberty suddenly pointed at his chin. A moment later, his brains were turned to mush. A somewhat high-pitched cry came from the Borg's other end as another soldier rushed him assault rifle, never ceasing to fire as no bullet found its mark. And there went Jimothy, she thought with morbid detachment as she prepared to use the moment to her advantage. The Borg swung his sword hand backwards, snarling as one bullet finally did find its mark somewhere in his chest. But he seemed to miscalculate the swing, and instead of a cut, he ended up burying his hand in the soldier's chest. Huh. The synthetic voice seemed almost as baffled by the situation as she was. Baffled by how lucky it was. She lined up her gun and took the shot, but this time, instead of the expected buzz in her eyes, she saw the Borg's mouth start steaming again. Only a blink before her revolver fired and the cyborg's head slammed back. Holding back the veritable river of relief, she turned back to see how the rest of her troops were doing, only to find that the vast majority of Esmo and Martin's squads had been decimated by the old man, with the merc looking almost untouched by the experience as he weaved from cover to cover with military discipline. While her command squad was being slowly and methodically dismantled by the combat assassin, only Vera and Jackie remained, and as the merc went to gut the woman, the burly man interposed himself with a sudden burst of speed, punching out with his gorilla arm. Only excellent instincts saved the merc as she threw herself back against the punch, only to still be launched away with the telltale crunch of bones breaking. Jackie was not willing to leave things to chance, though, and immediately jumped after her, only to get a faceful of smart bullets as the smaller woman rolled out from under him. And while he was momentarily stunned by the distraction, Vera paid for it with her life, the smart bullets twisting around their initial target and slamming into the combat medic's head. The commander cursed internally and immediately made the decision. She turned towards the exit, and saw the Borg slowly sitting up, Sergeant Williams twitching as he was impaled into the wall next to him by the inhuman snake limb the Borg liked using so much, one baleful golden eye glaring directly at her. Finally, her calm cracked. "What in fucking hell?" she whispered, and promptly decided this shit was not worth dying for. She immediately raised her gun, unloading the remaining rounds before even bothering to aim, and with her other hand, she grabbed for her final lifeline. There was no way in fucking hell the FBC had no EMP lacing, but at this point she was out of options. She ignored her surprise as she saw the cyborg flinch back and clutch at his chest as one of her shots landed, and immediately lobbed the grenade before bolting away and not looking back. She did not stop, she did not slow, and in what felt like both a blink and an eternity, she was out of the complex where a car and an armored troop transport were waiting for her. "Maria," she addressed her cousin quickly, uncaring of how clipped together her words would come out, "get us the fuck out of here." Her loyal, or as loyal as corpos can be, aide nodded all too slowly and immediately waved her hand at the specialist currently doing something to the troop transport, grabbing her hand and leading her by hand to the car. She didn't even notice, but she was starting to feel drowsy. Her eyes widened and she did an internal health scan, revealing multiple punctures by smart bullets. That little fucking... She stopped herself and began nodding. SB scramblers were another smart investment. Behind her, the specialist finished whatever he was doing and rushed over to join them before doing something with his cyber deck, and the unarmed APC's engines roared as it jerked forward and into the building. A loud crash followed, but by then they were already driving away, her agent connecting her to her reinforcements that were still 5 minutes away. Despite herself, she looked back, seeing the smoking entrance to her abandoned post. Meredith Stout was almost certain now she was fucked. Michael Magos Sobranov. For a single terrible moment, I was left to exist as a string of thought in the void, unable to interact with anything or sense anything but my biopod. It was a familiar feeling, one I had hoped to never experience again, and it made me fucking livid. That fucking meat. She'll be lucky if Kimigawa gets to her, because by all that is unholy, I will rip her the fuck apart. Suddenly, my sensor array reactivated, and in a painful jolt, I felt my limbs come back to activity, my soul remaining optic, blinking open as I returned to the waking world. Immediately, I forced my protesting cyberdeck to run one final scan, and exhaled as I only saw my allies still standing within the reception room. Rolling back on my feet and immediately frowning as I detected my suitcase back somewhere in the pile of bodies to the middle. "You good, Margos?" Kimigawa called, limping towards me. "Wait," Sharp called. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked, and just then my audio receptors resharpened and I heard an Engine? My optic widened. Scatter. Immediately all three of us rushed for the edges of the room, just as a fucking troop carrier burst through the wall, engines at full throttle and hurtling straight towards me. Just how fucked is my luck? I couldn't help but mutter in disbelief as I threw myself to the side, stumbling over my feet before stabbing my mechadendrite into the ground before me and pulling. Despite my efforts, I felt something immense smash into my side and I was sent sprawling away, my right leg crumpling under the force of the impact before a loud crash could be heard further on behind me as the entire lift system was destroyed. Grunting, I pushed myself to my feet, or at least tried to, but the artificial musculature in my right leg was not working. Sharp saw it, and his eyes narrowed, calm and calculative. "Can you keep up?" Scowling, I directed my mechadendrite to slither around my leg, forcing it into compliance even as I managed a limping step. "Yeah," I exhaled, "I'll manage." "Good." He nodded, lugging two very battered but very intact suitcases with him. "Let's get the fuck out of here, kids." "You heard the old man, Mag." Kimigawa Foe saluted from the other end of the room. "Just call me Mike," I scoffed, earning a loud chuckle from Sharp and a smile from Kimigawa. The look the driver gave us when he slipped by the Militech reinforcement wave was something I immediately carved into my memory. 40, Chapter 40, Wake-up Call. Michael Margot Sobranov, the half-formed Militech cordon disappeared behind us, the streets turning into a bit of a blur as Rogue's driver took the long road through Japantown, just in case someone was able to follow us out of that clusterfuck. For a long few minutes, no one said a thing. "We should have waited," Sharp finally commented from the co-driver's seat, his uninjured hand absently rubbing his wounded shoulder. Seeing our questioning looks, he shook his head and elaborated, "They looked like they were just about to charge downstairs. We could have literally just walked by behind them if we timed it right." The moment the old man started speaking, the Asian driver made a show of placing a pair of headphones over his ears, rising the volume until it was barely audible by us. "And how long would that have taken?" Kimigawa rolled her eyes. "Even with how quickly we managed to get out, we were still cutting it short with the reinforcements." The old man clicked his tongue and shook his head. It was still too risky. "Yeah," Kimigawa breathed out, "practically suicide for anyone who isn't a full Borg." They both turned to look at me, but I was too focused on examining the stack of deceptively small drone cases just next to my ever-so-slowly repairing right foot. The cases themselves were cracked and shot to shit, but the inner layers remained undamaged, and so did their contents. My eyes still narrowed at the thought. If the corpo rat who hired us tried to stiff us over this, I would be displeased. A hand landing on my shoulder broke me from that train of thought as I looked up to see Kimigawa looking me over with something approaching concern in her eyes. "You good?" "Just thinking." I shrugged the question away, focusing on the present instead. "Do you two need medical attention?" Kimigawa winced as I reminded her of her thoroughly cracked ribs, but still shook her head. "I'll be fine until we get somewhere safe." "I've been through much worse." Sharp threw in his own two eddies. "You should be worrying about yourself right now, taking the combined fire of a whole Militech platoon, even if it was garrison grunts, would kill anyone else." "I'm built better," I deadpanned, scanning them anyways and quickly confirming neither was anything approaching critical. And besides, I wouldn't have gone with it if I wasn't sure I had a good chance at survival. The man's eyes narrowed briefly before he offered a clipped nod. "If you are certain." "I am," I said somewhat defensively. The amount of damage I had taken was not anything to scoff at, but I wasn't about to advertise that fact. My left cyberlung was completely cracked through, the liver doing just barely better than that, and most of my limbs, excepting the mechadendrite, had had at least some of their mass sheared off in the fight. I wasn't even aware cyberware could feel sore, but apparently you learned something new every day. All those wounds were irrelevant in front of the real issue, though. I could still feel the bullet lodge just an inch away from my biopod, sitting there, mocking me. The fact I failed to extract the identity of the commander who managed to get away while in my EMP-induced state of panic was making me consider breaking something, many somethings. But throwing a tantrum was below me, and so I sunk myself deeper into my mind instead. Objectively, I had just achieved something amazing. Cutting through an entire company of corpos practically by myself. Yes, the other two helped, but I doubt anyone with sense would truly argue the point, was more impressive than any merc in NC would ever manage. But equally objectively, I had fucked up beyond all reason. In the heat of the moment, I felt like a god of steel and chrome, crushing anyone who dared stand against me with all the contemptuous ease of a man stepping on a bug. And that was the exact problem. The more I considered everything, the more I realized just how fucking close I came to killing myself through sheer bravado and stupidity. Sharp was more than correct in saying we should have found another way out, and was likely blaming himself for not seeing it as the most experienced among us. Hell, it didn't take me even a minute now that I calmed down to realize I could have literally gotten us to the second floor, where we could have simply leapt out of a window and been home free in an instant. But for whatever stupid fucking gonk reason, I didn't even consider the idea of not cutting the Militech grunts down before leaving. Have I been completely infected by Night City's own brand of stupid without even noticing? Shit, I muttered with a harsh exhale. Kimigawa tensed. What is it? Just realizing how fucky my power output got with so many holes in me. I bullshitted half-consciously. Not critical though, don't worry. I'm not worrying. You are worrying. She scoffed, her increasing shivers going unnoticed as she was sat to the side of my missing optic. Sharp was far more present, though, and he immediately began reassuring her as the two finally stopped staring at me, expecting me to explode into cyberpsychosis at any moment. It was a reasonable concern, or it would have been if it wasn't so personally insulting. My work doesn't fuck with the mind does that plenty on its own already. Once again, I found myself sinking into a thought spiral as the entire battle played out in my memory. And the more times the replay repeated, the more certain I was of one fact. We should not have won that fight. The element of surprise, speed, morale, and my pure unrelenting close-quarters aggression kept the corpos off their feet just long enough for us to kill them all before they could gather themselves and kill us back. Which was reasonably the best I should have expected, right? That is how fights were supposed to be won. Right? Well, personally, I say fuck that very concept with a mechadendrite. If a bunch of grunts had a chance to put me down, then that meant the actually threatening corpos would eat me for breakfast, especially since they would be the ones with the prep time and not me. It meant I wasn't safe, that my family wasn't safe. It felt disgusting to admit it, but I had allowed myself to get just good enough to stand on my own 2 feet and simply forgot the constant ever-hanging threat of attracting too much attention as if it no longer mattered. I knew that my skills with cyberware and medicine were something the megacorps would murder entire cities over, but some fucking how I seemed to have forgotten that fact just because I could go on a fucking stroll now. And now I had a bullet stuck near my brain, reminding me of just how fucking idiotic that was. Before I could spiral further into a panic, I clapped down on my thoughts with an iron grip, herding them back into order and moving on to something more productive than bemoaning my fate. Any fuck-up I survive is nothing more than a lesson. And this was a lesson I would not ignore. Multiple files began opening up within my recovered cyberdeck, implant and hacking ideas stacking atop each other as my adrenaline-rattled brain went into overdrive with inspiration on how best to become as unkillable as Adam fucking Smasher, and then take a step even beyond that. I'm almost thankful to the Militech bitch for the shake-up. I found myself musing briefly before shaking my head. Too bad she is probably getting literally crucified by her bosses right about now. Feeling oddly spiteful at that thought, I began scanning the contents of the most damaged crates for all it contained. One could never know when they'd need drone schematics. Yumiko Kimigawa. Is he? Sharp asked as things in the quadra turned quiet again. Yumiko clamped down on her terrified shivers and turned to her other teammate. Magos, or Mike, as he ultimately introduced himself, was absently tapping his fingers on the topmost drone case while staring off into the back of the driver's seat. All the while the rest of his body remained completely and unnaturally still. Of course he is unnatural still, you gonk. He is a fucking cyborg. Her irritation spiked, probably scanning the net. Seemed too stable for a psycho episode anyways. Sharp grunted after a moment as she failed to respond, and she was too tired to call out the obvious excuse. And you, Ms. Kimigawa, are you doing all right? Yumiko held back a full-body twitch, and her ribs thanked her for it. She had honestly forgotten how obnoxiously polite the old man was in their brief collective moment of relief. But even then, that was not the feeling dominating her mind at that moment. She had been through a lot of shit as a merc: assassinations, kidnappings, firefights, anything that required a capacity for violence, really. But she had never gotten involved in a true and proper slaughter like she had today. There was a limit to how much death someone could see in a short time and emerge completely untouched on the other end. And she wasn't referring to her biomon's constant warnings about her compromised skeleton. No, Yumiko admitted despite knowing better, but I will be. The old man's eyes flashed with pity, but he hid it as quickly as it came. Fortunate, I haven't been in a fight like that since the war. He shook his head, sighing as he turned forward to the car's windshield. Night City really is one of a kind. The fact she could find neither the argument nor motivation to defend her home made her let out a sharp exhale of amusement, one that left her feeling just a tiny bit lighter and made her ribs ache that much harder. Absently, she looked back to her still finger-tapping teammate and found herself wondering if she was this shaken by simple proximity, how was the actual killer dealing with the weight of it all? Michael Margos Sobranov. The moment the car crossed the bridge to Little China, I was forced back away from my designing session as all three of us were invited into a group call, and after a quick shared look, we all accepted it. The familiar face of Rogue appearing on the other end. Thankfully, I managed to ignore the small spike of annoyance bubbling up in my chest at being interrupted so suddenly. I was the gonk who decided to nod off before things were finished. Again, I see the three of you are still in one piece. The Queen of the Afterlife commented, fully drawing me to the present this time as she directed her gaze my way. Well, mostly anyway. Hilarious, Ms. Rogue. I deadpanned, even as I absently chewed down on a can of Nicola, my nanoforge greedily turning the fuel into usable material. We have 3 of the drones as requested. Good. The client will like that. She smirked briefly. They also in one piece. The drones themselves are perfectly fine. Sharp spoke up. The exfil went hot, so the packaging is a bit banged up, but the items will arrive as ordered, Ms. Rogue. Excellent work, as always, Sharp. Rogue nodded, closing the gig now. My eye narrowed at just how easily she believed him, but I quickly schooled my expression as the €600,000 was deposited into my account. Money always did wonders to soothe my mood. Even Kimigawa seemed to perk up all of a sudden. How was your new teammate? Rogue went on without pause. Really? I deadpanned silently. Seriously? Kimigawa did so far less subtly, though. It was almost cute with how detached she tried to behave most of the time. Sharp shot me a sideways glance outside the call, but quickly focused back on it. Competent and surprisingly multi-talented Ms. Rogue. His mustache twitched slightly. Why, I'd almost think you sent me someone overqualified if things didn't end up as hairy as they did at the end there. He did come with high recommendations, but seeing is believing. She shrugged. He has your approval then? Sharp smirked and shot me another glance. Without question. Good. Rogue nodded and addressed me next. Good news, kid. You are no longer on probation. I couldn't help but immediately roll my eye. Truly, will wonders ever cease? Cheeky little shit, the old woman huffed before turning serious again. The 3 of you best keep your heads down for a while. Nix is working on removing every trace of your involvement, but you did just cut through nearly 200 Miltiek grunts. Shouldn't be that big of a problem. I cut in. Anyone who survived was almost certainly infected by one of my demons and had us wiped from their agents. They'd need to identify us the good old-fashioned way, and I am the only one among us that is actually memorable. No offense, I added outside the call. Sharp snorted and Kimigawa flipped me off. Good thinking. Rogue nodded. But better safe than sorry. And you needed to actually earn your massive cut, yes. True enough. I shrugged. That should be everything. Rogue spoke up after a brief conversation with someone outside the call, likely Nix himself. Good work, you 3. See you in the afterlife when you feel like earning more eddies. Rogue out. The call closed. Well, Sharp commented after a moment, all is well that ends well. He clapped his hands. and that calls for a celebration. Fuck no, Sharp. Kimigawa spoke up immediately. I'm dragging your ass to a ripper, and then I'm sleeping for 3 days straight. My, how cruel. The old man chuckled. She shot me a sideways look and winced. You sure you can fix all of that on your own? My doc probably doesn't do full borgs, but I could still ask. Kind of you, but there is no need. I shook my head and started getting up, as the car stopped in a secluded parking lot in Little China. I'll be back to full functionality by morning. Ignoring their immediate dubious looks, I went on, the two of you were pretty good. I wouldn't mind doing more jobs together. Hopefully without them turning into open battles. Sharp quipped, don't want too much excitement in my old age, my poor heart won't be able to take it. Yes, hopefully. I nodded and stepped out of the car, still having to somewhat support my leg with my mechadendrite. Be seeing you. I gave them a wave as the car left the lot I designated, no doubt moving them to their personal Ripper/S. I had learned my lesson with Maine, so no pushing them to accept non-critical help for now. Thankfully, my most recent upgrade to my bucket of rust seemed to be working as intended, as my Mahir Supron drove itself into the parking lot a moment later, the freshly automated side door opening up on its own as I limped inside. Briefly, I hesitated as I eyed the literal pile of scrap metal I had stacked in a large box at the van's back, but I quickly shook myself back into focus and proceeded to do what must be done. Designing yourself with the ability to consume large amounts of metal was one thing. Devouring about 200 pounds of scrap metal in one sitting was another beast entirely. Though I had to admit, lithium was surprisingly tasty. My luck must have turned because by the time I got back, I found my mother asleep in her bed. And despite the damage to my legs, my lynx paws still worked perfectly fine as I managed to sneak by her and skulk over to my workshop. I quickly lifted my mattress over the entrance to muffle as much sound as possible. By some unholy miracle, she didn't wake up in the 6 hours it took me to fix everything, and I was so very tempted to simply let myself rest a while, allow all the excitement and adrenaline to settle down before I made any moves. Right, I spat, fuck that noise. I rang up the number of the Night Corp manager in charge of my floor and the few above and below it, quickly getting his bored, soulless response. What is it, resident? Michael Sobranoff of floor 16, sir. I said with a fake smile in my voice, my apologies for calling so late, but I would like to discuss a lease for a large commercial space. Oh. The fat man on the other end of the call perked up slightly. What did you have in mind? No. We didn't manage to go for 3 minutes before he tried to overcharge me by a massive margin, and I slammed him with the veritable book of blackmail I had on his ass. The fat fuck turned considerably more pliable after that. Now then, how to tell Mum about our sudden need to move? Honestly, I'd have almost preferred her seeing me without an eye.